Bedtime is supposed to be a happy event for a tired child. For me, it was terrifying. While some children might complain about being put to bed before they finished watching a film or playing their favorite video game, when I was a child, nighttime was something to truly fear. Somewhere in the back of my mind, it still is as someone who is trained in the sciences. I cannot prove that what happened to me was objectively real, but I can swear that what I experienced was genuine horror, a fear which in my life, I'm glad to say, has never been equaled. I will relate it to you all now as best I can. Make of it what you will, but I'll be glad to just get it off my chest. I can't remember exactly when it started, but my apprehension towards falling asleep seemed to correspond with my being moved into a room of my own. I was 8 years old at the time, and until then I'd shared a room, quite happily, with my older brother. As is perfectly understandable for a boy 5 years my senior, my brother eventually wished for a room of his own, and as a result, I was given the room at the back of the house. It was small, narrow yet oddly elongated room, large enough for a bed and a couple of chests of drawers, but not much else. I couldn't really complain because even at that age I understood that we did not have a large house, that I had no real cause to be disappointed, as my family was both loving and caring. It was a happy childhood during the day. A solitary window looked out onto our back garden. Nothing out of the ordinary, but even during the day, the light which crept into that room seemed almost hesitant. As my brother was given a new bed, I was given the bunk beds which we used to share. While I was upset about sleeping on my own, I was excited at the thought of being able to sleep in the top bunk, which seemed far more adventurous to me. From the very first night, I remember a strange feeling of unease creeping slowly from the back of my mind. I lay on the top bunk, staring down on my action figures and cars strewn across the green-blue carpet. As imaginary battles and adventures took place between the toys on the floor, I couldn't help but feel that my eyes were being slowly drawn towards the bottom bunk, as if something was moving in the corner of my eye, something which did not wish to be seen. The bunk was empty, impeccably made with a dark blue blanket tucked in neatly, partially covering two rather bland white pillows. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was a child, and the noise was slipping under my door from my parents' television. Bathed me in a warm sense of safety and well-being. I fell asleep. When you awaken from a deep sleep to something moving or stirring, it can take a few moments for you to truly understand what is happening. The fog of sleep hangs over your eyes and ears. Even when lucid, something was moving. There was no doubt about that. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. Everything was dark, almost pitch black, but there was enough light creeping in from outside to outline that narrowly suffocating room. Two thoughts appeared in my mind almost simultaneously. The first was that my parents were in bed because the rest of the house lay both in darkness and silence. The second thought turned to the noise, a noise which had obviously woken me. As the last cobwebs of sleep withered from my mind, the noise took on a more familiar form. Sometimes the simplest of sounds can be the most unnerving. A cold wind whistling through a tree outside, a neighbor's footsteps uncomfortably close, or in this case, the simple sound of bed sheets rustling in the dark. That was it. Bed sheets rustling in the dark, as if some disturbed sleeper was attempting to get all too comfortable in the bottom bunk. I lay there in disbelief, thinking that the noise was either my imagination or perhaps just my pet cat finding somewhere comfortable to spend the night. It was then that I noticed my door shut as it had been as I'd fallen asleep. Perhaps my mom had checked in on me, and the cat had sneaked into my room then. Yes, that must have been it. I turned to face the wall, closing my eyes in the vain hope that I could fall back to sleep. As I moved, the rustling noise from underneath me ceased. I thought that I must have disturbed my cat, but quickly I realized that the visitor in the bottom bunk was much less mundane than my pet trying to sleep and much more sinister. As if alerted to and disgruntled by my presence, the disturbed sleeper began to toss and turn violently, like a child having a tantrum in their bed. I could hear the sheets twist and turn with increasing ferocity. Fear gripped me, not like the subtle sense of unease I'd experienced earlier, but now potent and terrifying. My heart raced as my eyes panicked, scanning the almost impenetrable darkness. I let out a cry, as most young boys do. I instinctively shouted at my mother. I could hear something stir on the other side of the house, But as I began to breathe a sigh of relief that my parents were coming to save me, the bunk bed suddenly started to shake violently, as if gripped by an earthquake scraping against the wall. I could hear the sheets below me thrashing around as if tormented by malice. I didn't want to jump down to safety, as I feared the thing in the bottom bunk would reach out and grab me, pulling me into the darkness. So I stayed there, white knuckles clenching my own blanket like a shroud of protection. The wait seemed like an eternity. The door finally and thankfully burst open, and I lay bathed in light while the bottom bunk, the resting place of my unwanted visitor, lay empty and peaceful. I cried and my mother consoled me. Tears of fear, followed by relief, streamed down my face. Yet through all the horror and relief, I didn't tell her why I was so upset. I can't explain it. But it was as though whatever had been in that bunk would return if I even so much as spoke of it or uttered a single syllable of its existence. Whether that was the truth, I do not know. But as a child, I felt as if that unseen menace remained close. Listening, my mother lay in the empty bunk, promising to stay there until morning. Eventually, my anxiety diminished. Tiredness pushed me back towards sleep, but I remained restless, waking several times momentarily to the sound of rustling bed sheets. I remember the next day, wanting to go anywhere, be anywhere, but in that narrow, suffocating room. It was a Saturday, and I played outside quite happily with my friends. Although our house was not large, we were lucky to have a long, sloping garden in the back. We played there often, as much of it was overgrown, and we could hide in the bushes, climb in the huge sycamore tree which towered above all else, and easily imagine ourselves in the throes of a grand adventure in some untamed, exotic land, as fun as it all was. Occasionally, my eye would turn to that small window, ordinary, slight, innocuous. But for me, that thin boundary was a looking glass into a strange, cold pocket of dread. Outside, the lush green surroundings of our garden, filled with the smiling faces of my friends, could not extinguish the creeping feeling clawing its way up my spine, each hair standing on end. The feeling of something in that room, watching me play, waiting for the night when I would be alone, filled with hate. It may sound strange to you, but by the time my parents ushered me back into that room for the night, I said nothing. I didn't protest. I didn't even make an excuse as to why I couldn't sleep there. I simply and solemnly walked into that room, climbed a few steps into the top bunk, and then waited. As an adult, I will be telling everyone about my experience. But even at that age, I felt almost silly to be talking about something which I really had no evidence for. I would be lying, however, if I said this was my primary reason. I still felt that this thing would be enraged if I so much as spoke of it. It's funny how certain words can remain hidden from your mind, no matter how blatant or obvious they are. One word came to me that second night, lying there in the darkness alone, frightened. Aware of a rotten change in the atmosphere, a thickening of the air as if something had displaced it. As I heard the first casual twist of the bed sheets below, the first anxious increase of my heartbeat at the realization that something was once again in the bottom bunk. That word, a word which had been sent into exile, filtered up through my consciousness, breaking free of all repression, gasping for air, screaming, etching, and carving itself into my mind. Ghost. As this thought came to me, I noticed that my unwelcome visitor had stopped moving. The bed sheets lay calm and dormant, but they'd been replaced by something far more hideous. A slow, rhythmic, rasping breath heaved and escaped from the thing below. I could imagine its chest rising and falling, with each sordid, wheezing, and garbled breath. Has shuddered and hoped beyond all hope that it would leave without occurrence. The house lay, as it had the previous night, in a thick blanket of darkness. Silence prevailed, all but for the perverted breath of my as yet unseen bunkmate. I lay there terrified. I just wanted this thing to go, to leave me alone. What did it want? Then something unmistakably chilling transpired. It moved. It moved in a way different from before. When it threw itself around in the bottom bunk, it seemed unrestrained, without purpose, almost animalistic. This movement, however, was driven by awareness with purpose, with a goal in mind. For that thing lying there in the darkness, that thing which had seemed intent on terrorizing a young boy, calmly and nonchalantly sat up. Its labored breathing had become louder. as now only a mattress and a few flimsy wooden slats separated my body from the unearthly breath below. I lay there, my eyes filled with tears, a fear which mere words cannot relate to you or anyone else coursed through my veins. I would not have believed that this fear could have been heightened, but I was so wrong. I imagined what this thing would look like sitting there listening from below my mattress, hoping to catch the slightest hint that I was awake. Imagination then turned to an unnerving reality. It began to touch the wooden slats which my mattress sat on. It seemed to caress them carefully, running what I imagined to be fingers and hands across the surface of the wood, and then with great force, it prodded angrily between two slats into the mattress. Even through the padding, it felt as though someone had viciously stuck their fingers into my side. I let out an almighty cry, and the wheezing, shaking, and moving thing in the bunk below replied in kind by violently vibrating the bunk as it had done the night before. Small flecks of paint powdered onto my blanket from the wall as the frame of the bed scraped along it backwards and forwards. Once again, I was bathed in light, and there stood my mother, loving, caring as she always was, with a comforting hug and calming words, which eventually subdued my hysteria. Of course, she asked what was wrong, but I couldn't say. I dared not say. I simply said one word over and over again. Nightmare. This pattern of events continued for weeks, not months. Night after night, I would awaken to the sound of rustling sheets. Each time I would scream as to not provide this abomination with time to prod and feel for me. With each cry, the bed would shake violently, stopping with the arrival of my mother, who would spend the rest of the night in the bottom bunk, seemingly unaware of the sinister force torturing her son nightly. Along the way, I managed to feign illness a few times and come up with other less than truthful reasons for sleeping in my parents' bed. But more often than not, I would be alone for the first few hours of each night in that place, the room where the light from outside did not sit right alone. With that thing, with time, you can become desensitized to almost anything, no matter how horrific. I had come to realize that, for whatever reason, this thing could not harm me when my mother was present. I am sure the same would have been said for my father, but as loving as he was, waking him from sleep was almost impossible after a few months. I had grown accustomed to my nightly visitor. Do not mistake this for some unearthly friendship. I hated the thing. I still fear it greatly, as I could almost sense its desires and its personality, if you could call it that, one filled with a perverted and twisted hatred, yet longing for me, of perhaps all things. My greatest fears were realized in the winter. The days grew short, and the longer nights merely provided this wretch with more opportunities. It was a difficult time for my family. My grandmother, a wonderfully kind and gentle woman, had deteriorated greatly since the death of my grandfather. My mother was trying her best to keep her in the community as long as possible. However, dementia is a cruel and degenerative illness, robbing a person of their memories one day at a time. Soon she recognized none of us, and it became clear that she would need to be moved from her house to a nursing home. Before she could be moved, my grandmother had an especially difficult few nights, and my mother decided that she would stay with her. As much as I loved my grandmother and felt nothing but anguish at her illness, to this day I feel guilty that my first thoughts were not of her, but of what my nightly visitor might do should it become aware of my mother's absence, her presence being the one thing which I was sure was protecting me from the full horror of this thing's reach. I rushed home from school that day and immediately wrenched the bed sheets and mattress from the lower bunk, removing all the slats and placing an old desk, a chest of drawers, and some chairs which we kept in a cupboard where the bottom bunk used to be. I told my father I was making an office which he found adorable, but I'd be damned if I'd give that thing a place to sleep for one more night. As darkness approached, I lay there knowing my mother was not in the house. I didn't know what to do. My only impulse was to sneak into her jewelry box and take a small family crucifix which I'd seen there before. While my family were not very religious, at that age I still believed in God and hoped that somehow this would protect me, although fearful and anxious. While gripping the crucifix under my pillow tightly in one hand, sleep eventually came, and as I drifted off to dream, I hoped that I would awaken in the morning without incidents. Unfortunately, that night was the most terrifying of all. I woke up gradually. The room was once again dark. As my eyelids adjusted, I could gradually make out the window and the door and the walls, some toys on a shelf. And even to this day, I still shudder to think of it. For there was no noise, no rustling of sheets, no movement at all. The room felt lifeless. Lifeless, yet not empty. The nightly visitor, that unwelcome, wheezing, heat-filled thing which had terrorized me night after night, was not in the bottom bunk. It was in my bed. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Utter terror had shaken the very sound from my voice. I lay motionless if I could not scream. I did not want to let it know I was awake. I had not yet seen it. I could only feel it. It was obscured under my blanket. I could see its outline and I could feel its presence, but I dared not look. The weight of it pressed down on top of me, a sensation I'll never forget. When I say that hours passed, I do not exaggerate, laying there motionless. In the darkness, I was every bit a scared and frightened young boy. If it had been during the summer months, it would have been light by then. But the grasp of winter is long and unrelenting, and I knew it would be hours before sunrise, a sunrise which I yearned for. I was a timid child by nature, but I reached a breaking point. A moment where I could wait no more, where I could survive under this intimately deviant abomination no longer. Fear can sometimes wear you out, make you threadbare, a shell of nerves leaving only the slightest trace of you behind. I had to get out of that bed, and then I remembered the crucifix. My hand still lay underneath a pillow, but was empty. I slowly moved my wrist around to find it, minimizing as best I could the sound and vibrations caused, but it could not be found. I'd either nodded off the top bunk, or it had. I couldn't even bear to think if it had been taken from my hand. Without the crucifix, I lost any sense of hope. Even at such a young age, you can be acutely aware of what death is and very frightened of it. I knew I was going to die in that bed if I lay there, dormant, passive, doing nothing. I had to leave that room behind, but how should I leap from the bed and hope that I make it to the door? What if it's faster than me? Or should I slowly slip out of that top bunk, hoping to not disturb it? Realizing that it hadn't stirred when I moved, I began to have the strangest of thought. What if it was asleep? It hadn't so much as breathed since I'd woken up. Maybe it was resting, believing that it had finally got me, that I was finally in its grasp. Maybe it was toying with me. After all, it had been doing just that for countless nights, and now with me under it, pinned against my mattress with no mother to protect me, maybe it was holding off, savoring its victory until the last possible moment, like a wild animal savoring its prey. I tried to breathe as shallowly as possible, and mustering every ounce of courage I could, I reached over slowly with my right hand and began to peel the blanket off of me. What I found under those covers almost up my heart, I did not see it, but as my hand moved the blanket, it brushed against something. Something smooth and cold. Something which felt unmistakably like a gone hand. I held my breath as I was sure it must now have known I was awake. Nothing. It did not stir. It felt dead. After a few moments, I placed my hand carefully further down the blanket and felt a thin, poorly formed forearm. My confidence and almost twisted sense of curiosity grew as I moved down further to the disproportionately larger bicep muscle. The arm was outstretched, lying across my chest, with a hand resting on my left shoulder, as if it had grabbed me in my sleep. I realized that I'd have to move this cadaverous appendage if I even so much as hoped to escape its grasp. For some reason, the feeling of torn, ragged clothing on the shoulder of this nighttime invader stopped me in my tracks. Fear once again swelled in my stomach and in my chest as I recoiled my hand in disgust at the touch of straggled oily hair. I couldn't bring myself to touch its face, although I wondered to this very day what it would have felt like. And then it moved. Dear God, it moved. It was subtle, but its grip on my shoulder and across my body strengthened. No tears came, but God, how I wanted to cry. As its hand and arm slowly coiled around me, my right leg brushed against the cool wall which the bed lay against. Of all that happened to me in that room, this was the strangest. I realized that this clutching, rancid thing, which drew great delight from violating a young boy's bed, was not entirely on top of me. It was sticking out from the wall, like a spider striking from its lair. Suddenly, its grip moved from a slow tightening to a sudden squeeze. It pulled and clawed at my clothes as if frightened that the opportunity would soon pass. I fought against it, but its emaciated arm was too strong for me. Its head rose up, writhing and contorting under the blanket. I now realized where it was taking me. Into the wall. I fought for my dear life. I cried, and suddenly my voice returned to me, yelling, screaming. But no one came. Then I realized why it was so eager to suddenly strike. Why did this thing have to have me, now, through my window? That window would seem to represent so much malice from outside. Streaked hope. The first rays of sunshine. I struggled further, knowing that if I could just hold on, it would soon be gone. As I fought for my life, the unearthly parasite shifted, slowly pulling itself on my chest. Its head now poking out from under the blanket, wheezing, coughing, rasping. I do not remember its features. I simply remember its breath against my face, foul and as cold as ice. As the sun broke over the horizon, that dark place, that suffocating rum of contempt was washed. Bathed in sunlight, I passed out as its scrawny fingers encircled my neck, squeezing the very life from me. I awoke to my father offering to make me some breakfast. A wonderful sight. I had survived the most horrible experience of my life. I moved the bed from the wall, leaving behind the furniture. I believed it would stop that thing from taking a bed. Little did I think that it would try to take mine and me. Weeks passed without incident. Yet on one cold, frostbitten night, I woke to the sound of the furniture where the bunk beds used to be, vibrating violently. And a moment had passed. I lay there, sure I could hear a distant wheezing coming from deep within the wall, finally fading into the distance. I've never told anyone this story before. To this day, I still break out in a cold sweat at the sound of bed sheets rustling in the night, or a wheeze brought on by a common cold. And I certainly never sleep with my bed against a wall. Call it superstition, if you will. But as I said, I cannot discount conventional explanations such as sleep paralysis, hallucination, or that of an overactive imagination. But what I can say is this. The following year, I was given a larger room on the other side of the house, and my parents took that strangely suffocating, elongated place as their bedroom. They said they didn't need a large room, just one big enough for a bed and a few things. They lasted 10 days. We moved on the 11th. After writing my account of a terrible experience I had as an 8-year-old child, many have encouraged me to speak about the aftermath. I've been hesitant to do so, as I've felt unsettled since I broke my silence. Sleep has not come easy to me these last few nights. My skepticism, however, remains resilient, and as such I will tell of what I experienced in the other room. This won't be as long, as what occurred only took place over a few days, but that was more than enough for me. If you recall, after that unwelcome nightly visitor left me, I was moved into another bedroom a year later. This room was much larger than the previous one, and it had a warm and welcoming atmosphere to it. Some places feel bad. The room before felt foul, but this one didn't. Thankfully, I was given a normal bed. The previous one was taken apart and thrown out. A welcome sight, I might add. I loved my new room. I enjoyed the space for all my toys. I was happy that the place was large enough to have my friends drop by. But most of all, I was relieved to just be out of that uneasy, foreboding part of the house. On the first night, I slept more soundly than I'd done for a long, long time. Of course, I still moved my bed several feet from the wall. I told my mother that my friends and I like to use the gap between the bed and wall as a hiding place when we are playing. I awoke the next day, feeling refreshed and relaxed. As I lay there watching some of my favorite cartoons on a small portable TV, I noticed something odd. An old dark brown armchair, which had always been there, sat at the foot of my bed, large and looming. It was frayed and worn, having been given to us as part of a suite by my cousin, but had been used many times even by then. The chair itself. It was not unusual, but what unsettled me was that I could have sworn that before I'd gone to sleep, the chair had been facing away from the bed. Now, in the cold light of day, the chair was facing me. I assumed one of my parents had moved it while I slept, probably looking for something which had been left there before we switched rooms. The second night was not as restful. It was around 11 p.m., and I could hear my parents' TV from the other side of the house. The room was largely in darkness, the only illumination an orange hue drifting through my window from the street lights outside. I later content until I heard something quiet, yet unmistakable. At first, I thought it was the sound of my own breath, exhaling and inhaling as I rested. But when I stopped for a moment, the quiet, almost inaudible sound of someone else in the room, breathing in and out, did not cease. It continued rhythmically and without pause. I lay there in darkness. But while I was still recovering from the terror instilled in me from my experience in my previous bedroom, I was not entirely afraid. The breathing was so distant and unlike the wheezing I'd heard during my encounter with that thing in the wall that I remained calm. And even at that early age, I believed that it was so subtle that it was probably my imagination playing tricks on me. Still, I took no chances. I stepped out of bed, walked across the room, and turned a light on. The sound had gone. I stared at that old, worn armchair facing the foot of my bed, which was within reaching distance of where I slept, and turned it around to face the other way. I had no real reason to do so, but something about it sitting there, it scared me. The third night I was not so fearless. Again, I awoke in darkness. Lying on my back, I stared up at the ceiling, which seemed to happily absorb the dim orange light from the street. The tree outside my window swayed in a calm breeze, casting a strange collection of improbable moving shadows across the room. I could hear nothing but the long and distant hum of the city's night traffic. Just as I began to drift back into sleep, I heard a creak from the bottom of my bed, as if something had moved or shifted its weight on the floor. I raised my head, peering through the darkness, but saw nothing strange. Everything sat as it had done throughout the day. Nothing was out of place. I cast my gaze across the room. Some comics on the floor, a few boxes which had still to be unpacked, the armchair unmoved, still facing away from the bottom of my bed. There was nothing sinister here. I was now fully awake, glancing over at my TV, considering whether or not to enjoy some late-night shows. I'd have to keep the volume low, of course, as my older brother would hear it in the next room and no doubt tell me to switch it off. Just as I sat up fully in bed, I heard it again, a low creak accompanied by sound, the sound of the slightest of movements. I looked again at the room. The dim orange shadows cast by the leaf hanging by the window now took on a more menacing form. I still saw no reason to be afraid. I stared at the chair at the end of my bed. I saw nothing unusual about it. It's quite common for the mind to take a moment to fully come to terms with what it's seeing. It takes time to put the full horror of what is in front of you together into a cold moment of bitter realization. I was staring at that old worn armchair in the dark, but what I was also staring at was the person sitting in it. In the dim light, I could only see the outline of the back of its head, the rest obscured by the spine of the chair. I sat motionless, staring, praying, hoping that my eyes were just seeing things. The slow creak of movement as it shifted chilled me to my very core. This was not a trick of the dark. Then it shifted onto its right side. I knew what it was doing. It was turning to look at me. It was difficult to make out, for even in that room it seemed darker than everything around it. I saw what looked like a collection of long fingers slip over the crest of the chair, and then another. The room was silent, but for the sound of this thing shuffling in its seat. In my beating heart, at first I could only make out the outline of its forehead, but then it began to rise up, revealing two pinpoints of light in the dark recesses of its deeply set eye sockets. He was staring at me. I screamed, and within a moment my brother and mother came into the room, switching the light on. Asking if I'd had another bad dream, I sat speechless, barely acknowledging them, staring intently at the now empty armchair. I was only in that room for another few days before we suddenly moved. I saw nothing for the remaining nights, except for my last sleep in that room, where I awoke to the warm air of something breathing in my ear. I jumped out of bed and turned the light on. The slow, rhythmic breath of something unseen remained, louder than before. I spent the rest of that night on the couch in the living room. 2 years later, I slept soundly in my bed in our new house. There had been no other incidents, and I was sure I had left whatever strangeness had plagued me in that little average suburban home. I was, however, left one parting gift, my tormentors. And in my opinion, the washer in that armchair was a different entity to the thing in the elongated room, and had left one last surprise in store for me. Like an animal claiming its territory, I was not entirely safe from them. For one last terrifying moment, I felt the presence of those things. I lay there sound asleep, 2 years since those horrifying experiences. I was in the throes of a nightmare and suddenly, happily found myself awake, safe and sound in my bed. The room was darker than usual. I breathed a sigh of relief, as one does when waking from a nightmare. But the room was so dark. I could see nothing at all, as if something had snuffed out the light. I chuckled to myself, realizing I must have pulled my blanket up and over my face while sleeping. The cotton blanket felt cool against me, but the air was a little too warm, almost stifling. Just as I was about to remove the blanket for some air, I heard it. For the last time, I heard it. The rhythmic breathing of the watcher at the end of my bed. Fear gripped me, followed by anger and despair. Why couldn't I be left alone? I then did something most peculiar. I decided to speak to it. Maybe this thing didn't mean to harm me. Maybe it was unaware of the terror it had caused. Surely a young boy deserved some mercy. As the breathing grew louder and closer, I began to cry. I could feel its presence on the other side of the blanket, its breath hanging over me like a stagnant wind. Through the tears, I uttered 2 words, words which maybe would put an end to all this. Please stop. The breathing began to change. It became more animated, quicker somehow. I could hear something shuffling next to me, standing close by. The breathing then moved, first back to the foot of my bed and then slowly across the room, through the door, into the hallway, and then gone, half crying half. I lay there in the still darkness, my face still covered by the blanket. You may consider this a victory of some sort, but I do not, if those things were real. I know now beyond a shadow of a doubt that their intentions were not misconstrued. They were twisted, filled with malice. I would normally never use such a word to describe anything, but it's as close to evil as I hope I ever come. How do I know that? I'll tell you how. Moments after that thing seemed to have left the house, something pressed forcefully down on top of me, pushing the blanket with great strength against my face. I could feel a large hand, with long thin fingers wrapping the covers around my skull, its nails imprinted upon me like razor-sharp ridges. I managed to slide down into the gap between the bed and the wall, quickly making my escape, clamoring and screaming out of my room, waking my family. Make no mistake, that thing in the darkness tried to smother me. They tried to kill me. A few days ago, I submitted 2 nightmarish accounts from my childhood. I'd been compelled to silence, gripped by the irrational fear that somehow, even after all these years, should I speak of it, that those things would seek me out and once again find me. In the name of science and reason, I confronted those fears and set out to vanquish those tormented memories once and for all by sharing them with others, exposing them for what I believed they were, the delusions of a troubled child. I've held on to my skepticism and rationality for dear life. I've allowed them to define me. But this morning, I was presented with verifiable physical evidence, evidence of what I do not know, but it cannot be ignored. And it seems strange to me that the last few days have been so tainted by apprehension and misfortune after finally breaking my silence that I can no longer rely upon entirely conventional explanations. In the wake of sharing those traumatic experiences I had as a child, I have been plagued by an overwhelming sense of unease. Initially, I attributed this to fear I'd experienced in simply recounting and reliving those terrible events in my mind. But as the days passed, it felt like so much more. A feeling of impending doom consumed my every thought. While sleep came to me, rest did not. Each morning I awoke, my nerves on edge, as if deprived of sleep for an age. Nothing overtly frightening happened during the first few nights. No visitation, no unwelcome bedfellows, no wheezing breaths reaching out from deep within my bedroom walls. But I had that distantly familiar feeling of not being alone. Do not misunderstand. I did not sense someone in the room with me. I did not hear, smell, or feel anything remotely supernatural. But throughout my days and nights, I have sensed something subtle, almost on the periphery of my awareness. The feeling that something is on its way, that something is coming. Like the first few stagnant blasts of air from a subway tunnel, heralding the arrival of a lurching, unstoppable monstrosity. Surprising, yet expected. My sense of unease grew with each passing day. pushing its way under my skin, deep into my mind, like some form of cancerous infection. I tried to focus my attention on various writing projects in a vain attempt to fill my mind up to the brim with other thoughts, hopefully leaving no room for those contaminated memories. But those thoughts came to me nonetheless. My anxiety gained momentum until I could think of nothing else. I had to do something. I'd studied psychology for years at university, and with this I knew that anxiety. It's often the result of a loss of control, and that one of the most effective ways to combat it is to empower oneself. This is what I intended to do. Call it foolhardy. But I was going to go back to that place, that house where those terrible events took place. I was going to confront those memories and expose them for what they were nonsense. It was an hour's drive to my old home, but it was one filled with elation. I was confident, at ease, happy. I was in control now, and nothing was going to get in my way from showing that the place I had feared my entire life was nothing but an average, humdrum, harmless little suburban home. Gleefully negotiating the country roads and then motorway, finally I made it to the city. Gradually, the streets began to take on a familiar appearance. Memories of playing in that neighborhood came flooding back to me. A play park with my favorite slide, an ash pitch where we used to play football, my schoolyard filled with hide and seek and friendships long since abandoned but never forgotten. My mind wandered through those memories like a prodigal son walking home, wandered so much that before I realized it, I was pulling into the street where I had once lived. The road was long and disappeared far into the distance, finally entering into a sharp, blind turn. It was an old neighborhood and had been planned and built long before the advent of the car. This was evident by the narrowness of its roads, creating a strangely claustrophobic feeling, as if the houses on each side rose up, leering at passers-by. I slowed my speed and looked over each house that I passed. It was a uniform place, with every house looking not dissimilar. My heart suddenly began to beat faster as I felt the cold chill. There it was. There was the house. It was late afternoon, and the street was quiet, almost lonely. I stare at that little place, wondering how such an ordinary home could have instilled so much fear. I'd initially intended to only look at the house from afar, confirming it to me as a material construction, entirely explicable and removed from anything uncanny. But as I parked, I took a deep breath, and before I knew it, I was out of the car, walking towards that old metallic gate, its once bright floral shades now darkened by age, flaking deep green paint, revealing nothing but rust beneath. I ran my fingers over its uneven top, and with a subtle gasp, I pushed it open. Walking along the path, I was shocked at how disused the garden was. I thought to myself how much of a waste of a good lawn it was, which was all but obscured by a thick mosaic of weeds and other invasive species. But as I neared the house, I realized why it was unoccupied. Once again, a shudder crept through me, but as my anxiety rose up, I crushed it with a rational mantra. The simplest of explanations is usually the correct one. I assumed that due to the current economic climate, that the house had probably just been on the market for some time, and that the owner wasn't too aware of the old sentiment that the first bite is with the eye. But as I looked around, I could see no for sale sign nor one to let. It genuinely seemed as though this house had been forgotten, abandoned, and left to rot. The windows at the front of the house were filthy, and as such, almost impossible to see through. But as I wandered around to the back of the building, I could see more clearly inside. I would have imagined that a house such as this one would be empty, but on the contrary, it was entirely occupied by the trappings of a modern life. I could see a TV sitting in the living room corner, a coffee table with magazines strewn across it, various pieces of furniture sitting as if ready to be used, a couple coffee cups sitting on the windowsill, still full, covered in mold. I would have thought the house was lived in, if not for that thick layer of dust lying over everything, occupied by the occasional spider's web. It seemed as though the most recent occupants had left in a hurry and never returned. Clambering through a sea of waist-high grass and bushes, I eventually arrived at that innocuous little window at the back of the house. The very sight of it frightened me, but this was mere memory, and not the strange feeling of being watched from within as I'd experienced as a child, peering in. The room looked eerily familiar. I suppose there is little that can be done with a room so small, so oddly narrow. But through the dirt-covered glass, the room looked almost unchanged from when I'd slept in it. A bed, a set of drawers, and what looked like an assortment of toys on the floor. A profound sense of anger washed over me for a second, but I shook it quickly from my mind. The room was clearly that of a child's. and the thought of that thing harming another innocent, it filled me with contempt for such a thought, and within me swelled the desire to protect my child from such a thing. As I gazed at that wall of which a bed lay alongside it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up for a moment, and it was only for the slightest. I thought I saw the blanket on the bed move. More than that, through the window pane, I could have sworn I heard a wheezing gasp. Closing my eyes tightly, I repeated another scientific mantra. Science does not owe its debts to imagination. Opening my eyes, I saw nothing but an empty bedroom. No foul spirits, no unearthly things. Just a room, no more, no less. I breathed a sigh of relief. You may think that it was wishful thinking, but I genuinely felt that I'd shown myself that there was nothing to be scared of other than my overactive imagination. It was starting to get dark, and I wanted to be home before the night. Filled with confidence now that my anxieties were behind me, there was one last thing I needed to do. When we left that house, we did so in a hurry. As a child, it was disorientating, even frightening to leave everything I knew behind. But there was one thing left which I always wondered about. At the bottom of the garden stood a sycamore tree, which looked to be even older than the house. I was amazed at how unchanged it was. I hadn't grown up, gone on to pastures new, but the old sycamore still stood wise, warm, almost friendly in its appearance. I think it's a rite of passage for any child to have a place to hide things. It's often their first experience with independence, something removed from any authority figure for me. My stash was halfway up the old sycamore. I'm sure I must have looked like a fool, but I happily and gleefully climbed the tree with abandon. The configuration of the branches had changed in places, but overall, the happy memories of playing amongst the limbs of the old sycamore, of having a little piece of the world to myself, away from everyone else, seemed vivid, as it was remarkable how much remained unchanged. Halfway I caught my breath and smiled to myself. In the central trunk of the tree lay a hollow. Whether it had been created by an animal, or perhaps the tug of a gale on a weakened branch long ago, I do not know. But it was where I kept things. If I found something which I was sure would be taken from me for being inappropriate, into the hollow it would go. The truth is, though, that the majority of the items inside were not very interesting, mostly just toys and rarely exotic pieces of contraband, like a slingshot or some smoke bombs. I had no reason to hide the toys, but when I was young, it felt adventurous to have a secret. The hollow was dark and filled halfway with rotting leaves, no doubt deposited there from countless autumns. Nevertheless, I reached deep inside to see what remained. I couldn't believe it. I found a toy I'd hidden there before we moved all those years ago. I could feel the plastic in my hand, its sharp edges unmistakable, but the leaves and darkness of the hollow obscured its view for me as I struggled to remove it from the thick, wet mixture of rotting leaves and rainwater. It seemed to be caught amongst a collection of small twigs. The reason I was so excited was that I knew when we moved that I'd left one of my favorite toys behind a small plastic First World War British soldier. It may not sound like much, but I had grown up on my family stories of my grandfather's adventures during both wars, and while he'd passed away before I was born, I would often act out exaggerated versions of the stories with this small soldier in the role of the hero, my intrepid grandfather. At the time, I thought a hollow, the perfect hiding place for a soldier. My delight, however, quickly turned to horror. I felt sick to my stomach, for as I pulled the soldier out, I realized it was not my toy, but something else entirely. Stuffed into the back of the hollow amongst the sludge, and now in my hand, was the skeletal remains of a small animal. The bones crunched together in my grip, and I almost lost my balance. I climbed back down carefully, dejected. There was nothing else in the hollow. My toy was gone, probably taken by another child during the following years. What remained of the poor animal I buried under some loose earth in the garden. I left that place immediately. Despite my unfortunate encounter in the hollow, I still felt empowered that I'd actually plucked up the courage to revisit that place to see how ordinary it really was. It made me feel in control once more of my faculties. I did not at the time require anything other than a conventional explanation. I said goodbye to the old neighborhood, to that bad memory once and for all, and began to make my way home. By the time I'd driven out of the motorway, something had begun to filter through from the back of my subconscious. At first, I disregarded it, dismissing it as my imagination. But as the sun shone its last and dipped below the horizon, I sensed the growing of a compulsion in me, an idea which seemed to have been born and nurtured for no good reason, no rationale, no sound causal footing, but one which had to be followed at all cost. I must get home. I increased my speed, zipping sporadically between the slower cars on the motorway, looking in the rearview mirror, keeping an eye on what might be following. I had to get home. Again, I drove faster, constantly looking behind, as if racing some unseen pursuer. 70, 80, 100. I tore along the road. I beeped. I yelled. The sweat lashed off me. What the hell was happening to me? Please just let me go home, white knuckle. I finally made it off the motorway and onto the country roads which would lead directly to my town. The roads were narrow and wound around the now bleak and ominous countryside. Darkness seemed to blanket the road in front of me. I turned my full beam on and breathed a sigh of relief to see a bright light again. Even if artificial, the manic anxiety which had seemed to grip me on the motorway appeared to have diminished. However, I still glared into the rearview mirror more often than I should have, just to make sure that there was nothing following me. What a ridiculous thought to think of something chasing my car, to put myself and others in danger by speeding down a busy motorway. Madness. Still, madness or not, I felt compelled to get away as quickly as possible, and even though I'd managed to collect my nerves, the loneliness of the road I was on fueled my yearning for my own town, my own tea, and my own bed. Nervously, I traversed the web-like winding roads which seared through the countryside, feeling relieved. At the first sign of the lamppost of civilization and of the boundaries of my town, I pulled up outside of my house, switching the engine off, and sat for a moment in silence. I had to stop all this nonsense. Things coming out of the walls, watchers smothering me at night, looking into someone's window like a prowler. All this was crazy. Tomorrow I will start afresh. No more writing about my childhood experiences. No more reliving dread-filled nights. Just getting back to normal, carrying out my work, spending time with my girlfriend, and most of all, reaffirming my belief, faith, and confidence in science and rationality. And then the thing in the back seat leaned over, grabbed me by my shoulder, and breathed a foul, rancid breath from deep inside its lungs, down the back of my neck. I scrambled for the door, my arms flailing around, looking for the lock. Fear possessed me, shook me, a fear I remembered all too well, a fear from all those years ago, lying awake at night in that sickening room. The inside of the car had grown much colder, but that was nothing compared to the icy fingers burrowing into my shoulder. I thought I was going to die, that this thing would finally get its way after all this time. The door handle popped in my panicked grip, and I fell out of the driver's seat out of the pavement. For the briefest of moments, I thought I caught a glimpse of something in the back seat. Vague, the form of an old man, yet twisted and distorted, grinning. From ear to ear, there was no one around, and if there had been, I would have looked mad, for the car was empty. I grabbed the keys from the ignition and booted the door shut with my foot, locking it for the night. I staggered down the path and into my house. I'm not going to lie to you. I drank myself to sleep last night. You may recall that I said I had evidence. Actual physical evidence of something unnatural. You might be wondering what that evidence is. Well, I could say that it was the marks on my shoulder that made me shudder with fear. Or I could tell you that my bedroom window, lying prized open this morning by what looked like claw marks, has left me dreading tonight or any other. But no, none of that scared me as much as what I saw today upon waking. Sometimes the most frightening of messages are the most simple, for lying on my chest as I awoke this morning was a toy soldier. The soldier I had hidden in that hollow all those years ago returned to me as an adult, and it was bitten in half. Last night was the most frightening of my life, so much so that I can barely bring myself to think about it. By now I will have submitted what occurred during my visit to that cursed place I once called home, a visit which heralded the return of my childhood fears. No matter what foul thing befell me then, nothing could have prepared me for last night. After waking up to the chilling sight of that toy soldier bitten in half, I found that the window to my bedroom was slightly ajar. On closer inspection, it looked entirely as if the window had been prized open from outside. The latches were bent back out of position, as if subjected to an unrestricted, unbound brute force from the outside looking in. I could see three indentations where the unwelcome housebreaker had used some kind of tool to leverage the window unnaturally away from its latch. What was peculiar about those markings was that they seemed to cut across the outside of the window frame like an old uneven razor, unlike a crowbar or other implement, which would have merely left a dent where it had been used as a wedge to force the window open. Nothing had been stolen, and I attempted to rationalize the markings on the window as human-made and not claw-like as they appeared to be. The toy soldier returned to me so violently I could not explain, and my heart sank at the thought of it. I knew it was a message, but it seemed to me to be more of a twisted joke, announcing the arrival of my childhood predator rather than something to be puzzled over or interpreted. I spent the morning checking each room of my house and its contents. Nothing was missing. I could only hope that whatever that fiend had been in the back seat of my car the previous night, that it had only wished to frighten me one last time and then be on its way. Maybe its reach would be weakened so far from my childhood bedroom. It is all too easy for any sane person to persuade themselves that a traumatic event is something more benign. But in this instance, I could not. That broken toy was not a mere joke, but a promise. A promise that it would return for what I did not wish to know. My thoughts naturally tumbled inwards and back to those terrifying nights I had as a child. I was now reintroduced to the apprehension of bedtime, the longing for the day, and the anxiety of night. Like an old and relentless enemy, my fear grew throughout the day, festering inside of me, leading to strange and ominous thoughts about the consequences of unwittingly bringing that thing home. Do not misunderstand me. My fear was not simply for my own safety. As a child, I believed that my nightly visitor was transfixed and consumed by wanting me, but I did not feel that my loved ones were in any danger. This, however, had changed. I did worry. This time I did feel nothing but fear for my loved ones. Because you see, I don't live alone. My girlfriend and I moved in together over 2 years ago. I've caused enough damage now that I do not wish to speak her name and will simply refer to her as Mary. Mary and I had a happy existence, and in fact we were very much in love. This coming Christmas morning, I was going to propose to her, but that beautiful moment has now been bitterly taken away from me by that abomination. I knew that Mary would be home that evening. She works in events and promotion, and as a result is often away from home for days at a time, traveling around the country, coordinating various conferences and exhibitions. I do not complain about this, as she and I both know that I am a solitary character, and that the odd few days of solitude normally do me good, allowing me to dive headlong into my writing, absorbing each and every word undisturbed. Despite this, I always miss her, and with the events of the past week, reliving those torturous nights and then allowing them to return, I had missed her far more acutely than ever before. She arrived at around 6 p.m., and I greeted her with a smile, a warm embrace, and a passionate kiss. I tried to hide my perturbed state of mind from her, but Mary knows me better than anyone I've ever met and immediately asked, "What's wrong?" I tripped and fumbled through my words as I explained to her that I had written a story about my childhood, and that exploring those dark and twisted memories had left me distraught. Mary has an incredibly caring nature, and she immediately laid her suitcase and bags on the floor, sat me down on her couch, and with her soft and gentle way, asked me to talk her through everything. But I couldn't. I couldn't mention this wretch, which had now found its way to our home. An invisible and twisted invader, which had been led there by my idiotic curiosity. At the time, I felt that she would think me mad, but now how I wish I'd told her. If there is one thing more damaging to a relationship than a lie, it's a half-truth. Not because it's deceitful, but because it is a corruption of the truth, perverted and abused to suit the teller's needs. I told her my half-truth. I told her about my story, that of the thing in the narrow room and the watcher at the end of my bed. But that is where the truth ended and a lie began. I deliberately and deceitfully mentioned that it was of course just my imagination as a child, and neglected to talk of my experience of returning to the scene of those depraved crimes. Knowing that she would see the damaged window latch and claw marks, I spun a web as I told a grand tale about waking up to a burglar attempting to break into our house and having to chase them away. I was quite the hero. I lied to her, and she showed me great sympathy and kindness for my deception. I was embarrassed by the truth, and I am ashamed of my lie now. If I'd been truthful, then perhaps we could have faced this menace together. But instead that thing took advantage of my dishonesty, and it put a wedge between us. The events of last night desecrated the most important thing in the world to me. Nighttime arrived in all of its bleakness and was unwelcome. I lay in the darkness, waiting. Mary was sound asleep next to me, each breath a soothing reminder of companionship. But despite my growing aversion to loneliness, I would have no sleep that night. I knew from experience that when my uninvited guest would show itself, it would do so with subtlety, increasing its grip on me with each visitation, as if requiring time to build up its strength, a leech feeding on my fear. My nerves kept me on end, which fought back the oncoming onslaught of sleep admirably. In the end, though, biology won, and as my bedside clock lumbered towards 4 a.m., sleep took me. The relaxing blanket of nightly oblivion, anxiety washed away, my worries a distant memory sinking deeper into the soft mattress below, and finally into a long sought for rest. Sleep, no matter how deep, is rarely all-encompassing, for as I hovered over the cusp of a dream, something began to bother me, something invasive yet distant. I slowly opened my eyes and allowed them to adjust to the darkness. Mary lay soundly asleep, and I calmed myself by listening to her breathing. Inhale, exhale, again and again, rhythmically, hypnotically. I began to drift towards sleep once more. Wait, no. There was something else, distinct yet undefinable. It was distant, out of the way, almost obscured or smothered, as if coming from behind something. I strained my ears in an attempt to define it, but it was all too quiet. I remained in bed for several more minutes, but with each passing second, that almost inaudible sound grated on me, like broken glass on a raw nerve. Sleep was now abandoned, and with much frustration, I decided to reluctantly investigate the source of the noise. I sat up in bed and listened intently. It was unlike any other sound I'd ever heard, quite low. But as my mind adjusted to the noise, I slowly began to piece its nature together. It was most certainly obscured by something, but the closest thing I could relate it to was a repetitive murmur. I heard something similar previously when I was a child visiting my grandmother in a nursing home, a place which had left an impression on me, seeing the wandering residents, confused and of a fractured mind, meandering around the grounds like lost inmates, murmuring repetitively to themselves of days gone past, repeating nonsensical phrases and words. This is what it reminded me of, a continuous stream of indecipherable words uttered by someone in the throes of confusion. I turned to check on Mary, watching her chest rise and fall with each breath. Assured that she was undisturbed, I left the bed. As I stood up, I recognized immediately that the murmuring was louder. While dark, I had left the light on in the hall, as I always do, which crept under the door and allowed me to view the room in a dim but visible way. I looked around to see if anything was out of place, but the room appeared as expected. My mind ambled back to that night as a child in the second room, when noises could be heard from some unseen, yet ever-present menace. I took a step forward, and as I did, the noise once again grew in volume. While I was still at a loss in deciphering the words, I could now hear the character of the voice. It was old, scratched by age with harsh, guttural undertone to it. The words were being repeated at a frantic pace and seemed anxious, yet muffled by some unknown barrier. I was frightened, but I drew strength from Mary being in the room, and with a deep breath filled with trepidation, I took another slow and silent step forward, my bare feet cushioned by the cold floor below. Again, the voice became louder. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but I could have sworn that it had become more agitated as I got closer. The next step I took shook me to my very core, for as that murmuring, garbled voice grew louder still, amongst the rambling, gravelled sound of it, I heard a word to be feared. It spoke my name. Dear God, it knew my name. To me, it was as if knowing who I was somehow endowed that thing with an unlimited reach, that I may never be rid of it, that it could kill me at any moment. Something suddenly caught my eye, a movement accompanied by a ruffle of cloth. I knew now where that rhythmic, agitated voice originated. I knew now why it was muffled and difficult to decipher. I could now see it only a few feet in front of me, standing behind the closed curtains. The moon was in its ascendancy outside, and while its glimmer could not entirely penetrate the thick cloth, it could barely and faintly outline the thing watching between my window and the curtains. I cannot now convey the strangeness which then overcame me. My anxiety and terror had heightened, but an unusual compulsion, an untimely sense of purpose, took me over. I had to see what it was. I took another tentative step towards the curtains. They swayed slightly as if caught by a breeze, but I could not tell whether the movement had been caused by myself, or the hand of that thing hiding behind a shroud of cloth. I was now close enough to hear its labored breathing, the displacement of fluid at the back of its throat, palpable with each inhalation. This was it. I was going to confront this monstrosity from my past, this tormentor of children, this coward. Raising my right hand slowly, I accidentally touched the fabric of the curtain, causing a subtle ripple which parted it momentarily. I gasped, for through that temporary sled, only for a moment I saw it. My God, how can I describe what was standing there? Even now, I close my eyes and wish that I could erase it from my memory. It shivered and shook as it continued to murmur, repeating some indecipherable phrase, sounding like a bizarre mixture of numerous languages. Its emaciated skin stretched over an unnatural frame of brittle and prominent bones, vertebrae, ribs, and other inner workings, almost protruding through its paper-thin, pale, languidly pink, and almost bruised-looking husk. As malnourished as it appeared, the stomach was distended in places, and its bony appearance did nothing to diminish the feeling that it was capable of exerting itself with brute, perverted force on its victims. Sickness swelled in my stomach. A tainted, offensive smell filled the air, and as it murmured and whispered in the darkness through what sounded like broken, fractured teeth, I could not help but feel pity for this wretch. Quivering in the night as a victim of a long starvation, I quickly came to my senses and realized that this thing was not to be pitied, but feared. Not to be understood, but exposed. It was not shivering because it was cold. It was shaking with excitement, like a drug addict anticipating their next dose. Standing there, contemplating what I'd just seen between the curtains, I once again prepared myself to remove its shrouded cloth protection and to reveal it for what it was, a cold-hearted vandal, a prowler of the worst kind. And as I once again raised my hand to draw the curtain, something caught my attention. It's incessantly confusing. Gravelly and inarticulate whispers squeezed through that broken mouth and uttered the three most terrifying words that I've ever heard. Look behind you. A cold breath slid down the back of my neck. Momentarily I froze, but love is a powerful motivator. Had I been on my own, fear would have taken me, shaking any possibility of resistance from my mind. But with Mary sleeping soundly in the same room as that thing, shielding someone I loved was my only thought. I turned around slowly, and as I did so, I could hear it wheezing, gasping, groaning for air. At a quarter turn, I could smell its breath, the stench of death. Then I heard another voice. It was not that horror in the darkness, but Mary. She let out a scream that'll haunt me for the rest of my life. I turned quickly and laid eyes on it, but it wasn't behind me. It was on the bed. It writhed and rasped, wheezing in delight, its bony spine curved with the anguish of countless years, protruding through a ragged, torn piece of cloth which hung loosely over its torso in a vain attempt to appear almost human. But was it human? Has it once been human? Or was it something worse, so vile, so despicable, so utterly contemptible that no man or woman could ever attempt to quantify or understand it? I sprung forward towards it, grabbing, hitting, pulling at the thing with every ounce of my strength, its loose skin slipping through my hands. It squeezed and forced Mary's face into her pillow as its other limbs arched and contorted, tearing at her nightdress. Running its long, starved fingers over her, Mary's screams were muffled by the pillow as I began to fear that she was being suffocated. I shouted. I pleaded with her to leave her alone, to take me to do anything she wanted. But that only served to animate the fiend to even greater depths of depravity. It was hurting her, my beautiful Mary. Suddenly it stopped, but it still kept. Of its brittle, gangly, weighted hands on the back of Mary's head, pushing her face further into her pillow. I had my hand around its neck, trying as best I could to strangle it, but I couldn't. Its scrawny frame belied its overpowering strength, and I watched in sickly disbelief as it began to run its fingers through Mary's hair slowly, that almost with affection. I could now hear the twisting and cracking of bone, the popping of cartilage, the snapping of tendons. But it wasn't Mary. I was now on its back, with my arm wrapped around its throat and my chin rubbing against the abrasive skin of its shoulder. As its spine dug sharply into my stomach, it twisted its head. In an entirely inhuman way, its neck clicked and groaned under the strain with every arthritic movement, as if hindered by 1,000 years of rigor mortis. It was now looking at me. I have heard often said of some people that they cannot see the forest for the trees, but now I truly appreciate that sentiment. So close was I to its black, icy stare that I could not take in its surrounding features. I increased my grip. I swore. I screamed. I would have torn its throat out if I could have. But it was all in vain as it continued to run its fingers through Mary's hair while just looking at me. I don't think I will ever truly recover from the sound which seeped out through what I assumed to be a grin. A wheezing sigh. A grunt. Something which sounded very close to a sinister, otherworldly laugh. As its face touched mine, its eyes stared deep into me. It was staring as if it wished to say something, as if it was trying to communicate a simple idea to me. Malice. With a wrenching, stuttered, and violent movement, it tore an entire fistful of hair from Mary's head, and it left behind an open wound. Then it was gone. Mary didn't scream. She merely whimpered. I turned the bedside lamp on, but no words of care or sympathy could console her. She wept uncontrollably. The bed was soaked in blood. I hugged her, told her that everything would be okay, and then she looked at me. Looking at her tear-filled eyes, I knew what she thought immediately. She thought I'd attacked her, that I had done those terrible things. Of all the experiences I've had, that look of betrayal, it's the most painful. She's gone. After composing herself, she gathered up some things and laughed. I tried to explain. I tried to tell her everything that had been happening, but she wouldn't listen. Who would believe such a preposterous story? She simply said that she wouldn't call the police, but that if I ever attempted to contact her, she would do just that to her. I was the aggressor, not that thing. As she left, she turned to look at me one last time and then burst into tears. I know now I've lost her. The woman I love more than anything on this earth thinks I'm a violently hideous human being. If only she could understand that whatever did this, that it wasn't human. And if it ever was, it had long since abandoned that nature. It was 5 a.m. when Mary left me. It's 9 a.m. No, I'm sitting here in the cold light of day at my kitchen table writing this so that there's some record of what has transpired, so that people know, so that Mary knows that whatever happens, that whatever occurs from here on in, that it was this horrible creature from my childhood, from that cursed, narrow room all those years ago, which rained this misery down upon me, upon us. I must now dispense with this sentiment. I could easily sit here mourning the loss of my relationship with Mary, or I could allow myself to be overcome with fear to do nothing. But that simply will not do. I can hear the laughter of my neighbor's children outside. At different stages in my life, I remember that same feeling of joy and happiness. From something as simple as playing with friends, climbing a tree, or kissing the woman you love, or even drifting off to sleep at bedtime to dream of what could be. In the safety of a happy family home. Memories. Only memories. I fear I will never experience that happiness again. This thing, it's broken me. But I am resolute. Whatever that hideous wretch has in store, whatever it desires to do with me, I will not allow that thing to harm another person, or to invade another child's life as it did mine all those years ago. I must leave you all now, as there is much to be done before it gets dark, before it returns. My plans are made, and with any luck they will succeed. I wish I could say we will speak again, but I think that is unlikely. I hope you understand what must be done, because tonight I'm going to kill it. I am shaking as I write this. I was released by the police less than 2 hours ago, and I am compelled to record the events of the past day and night as quickly and accurately as possible. In some ways I want to forget, but I know that I cannot. I know that I should not. For my own sanity, I must divulge what has happened. It is far too important. Should I ever allow myself to be swayed by the mechanical, rational nature of the world once again, these words should serve to remind me that what is unseen is both mysterious and frightening. After Mary left, I knew that I'd lost her forever. But rather than be consumed by depression and inaction, I was invigorated by one purpose, by one thought, by one idea that I knew I had to carry out. I had to destroy that thing, for I could not allow the chance that it may one day hurt my loved ones or desecrate the innocence of another child. I also knew that I faced death, but feeling that I'd already lost everything, that was a small price to pay. It is said that revenge is a dish best served cold, but having waited my entire adult life to be rid of this thing, its memory, and the shadow that it cast upon me, I met the proposition of killing this fiend, this corrupt and perverted force, with a smile on my face. That night it would be dead, even if I had to drag it to hell with me. Busying myself for the next few hours, I packed a bag and wrote a letter to Mary and my family explaining what had happened and that they weren't to blame. I phoned my mom and dad, then my brother, just to hear their voices one last time. But I did not let on that I thought I might never speak to them again. My mother's intuition led her to ask if everything was all right, and I smiled and told her I loved her before saying goodbye. At about 7 o'clock, I made my way to the car. The sun had already set, and the street seemed eerily quiet, as if the scene of an unattended funeral. I sat in the driver's seat, leaving the door on the other side open, awaiting my most unwelcome passenger. By 9 o'clock, nothing out of the ordinary had happened. The place remained deserted, and the cold night air flowing through the open door was beginning to bite. As I sat there, contemplation echoed through my mind. I ruminated on the nature of this parasite. One question rose out of a sea of thoughts, towering above all else, unmoving and continuous. Can you kill something which is already dead? I did not know if this was a thing of the grave or some otherworldly specter which could be considered alive in some way. But just as I was reevaluating my plan, there it was. It was subtle at first, but there was a small, almost indistinguishable shift in the suspension of the car. It was in the car with me. Unseen, yes, but there nonetheless, as I heard the slightest of whispered breaths from the back seat, I leaned over and calmly closed the passenger door. I turned the key in the ignition, and as I pulled out of the street, I could have sworn I heard a quiet yet distinctly malicious laugh, as if something was mocking me. Didn't know what I planned for it. Our destination was not far, but the roaming hills through which our taken country RD penetrated rose up and diminished with regularity, a stark reminder of the ominous isolation of night. Occasionally on the way, I could hear something from behind, but I refused to look for that thing in the dark. Patience. It would not be long before I'd confront it. The irony hit me. I was worried about scaring off the same thing which had terrified and tortured me as a child. I had to be resilient, and so drove carefully and calmly through the countryside, swamped by darkness, hoping that my unearthly passenger would not suspect me. I arrived. The wheels of the car struggled and slid on the undergrowth as I headed off of that narrow country RD. The landscape had opened up, and as I looked at the broken and rotting trees around me, I felt that it was fitting to come to this bleak place in the cold night to destroy that bleakest of things. The land suddenly came to an abrupt end. A cliff edged out from an old quarry, looking deep into the black waters of the lake below. The cliff edge was relatively flat and had in fact at one time housed a road which had subsided into the lake decades earlier. The local kids would tell stories about the vengeful ghosts of those killed, but they were just stories. Or perhaps they weren't. In the past, I would have disregarded such tales, but who would believe mine? If I told them now, I would switch the engine off and park several meters away from the cliff edge, switching off any lights and composing myself for what would come. I sat in that car for what seemed a lifetime, the only company given to me by the occasional splash of water against the cliff below. I waited. This thing was smart of that. There was no doubt it had toyed with me, relishing the pain and torment it had caused, as only something of a coldly frozen intellect could. For this reason, I knew it would suspect me, and perhaps even flee if I brought the car too close to the cliff's edge. I had to wait for it to attack, let it feed, let it revel and gorge itself on me. Perhaps then it would not notice. As I slowly plunged the car into that dark, icy water below, I was going to drown it. I had appraised the potential consequences in my head and reasoned that there would be a moment, a singular moment, where I would have a slim opportunity to escape from the car just before it reached the edge. Mary and I used to go here sometimes, a place to be together, away from everything else. And it did not look nearly as stark during the summer's day. I therefore had the place in mind, and I knew it well. The drop was at least 50 feet to the depths below, and I did not want to be in that car as it hit the water, nor trapped inside with that abomination. I waited. Then I heard it slowly at first, and then, increasing in rate and volume, a rasping, wheezing breath from behind. Strangely, it sounded more labored than before. Each breath, a struggle filled with fluid, rotten and decayed. A shiver ran up my spine. The breath drew closer. My heart began to race, beating hard and fast as I looked up and saw the windscreen begin to ice from the inside. I could see my breath, a natural thing indeed, but what was unnatural was the breath visibly moving across my face from the side. I turned slowly. I wanted to leave, run into the night, but I had to stay. I couldn't allow it to escape. It was sitting in the passenger seat. I was staring at it, and it hit me hunched over, covered by darkness, contorted, gaunt, hand seized. It slowly moved towards me. One bony leg cracked and groaned as it slid over my lap and onto the other side. It was sitting on me. It pulled itself in close to me, and through a shard of light provided by the moon, I saw its face. Skin hung from its jagged features. Glassy eyes stared deep into me as its grin spread up through its face, unnaturally wide as the result of its half-rotten flesh exposing the rotten muscles, broken teeth, and a rancid smile beneath. Pulling closer, it opened its mouth, revealing a wet tongue which could be seen through part of its missing jaw. Wheezing, breathing heavily, a foul stench which stung my eyes and filled my mouth elicited a response from me as I retched, my body attempting to expel its poisonous fumes, and as I did so, it stopped for a moment and then cackled to itself happy. Into its icy cold eyes, the it gave the impression of an afflicted and increasingly weak old man. It was still very strong, but it seemed as though it had lost some of its potency. Maybe leaving that elongated room had somehow affected it. Its long protruding fingers caressed my face, and then as a show of intent, it stuck one of them deep into my shoulder. I screamed, the rotting fiend moving its finger to cause the maximum amount of damage and pain that it could. It was time. With my free arm, I turned on the ignition, and though my shoulder was still pinned to the seat, I managed to fight through the pain, put the car into gear, and took off as fast as I could. The creature flailed and screamed. It attempted to climb over me into the back seat, but I held on with all my strength, the thoughts of what it did to merry enough to fuel my rage. We raced toward the edge of the cliff, and I eyed the driver's door frantically. As we neared our icy plunge, I screamed in anger at its festering, rancid face and pushed it off of me. It scrambled into the back seat for dear life as I scrambled for mine by unlocking the car door. It was too late. The car careened over the cliff face, and before I knew it, we hit the dark water, splitting the black glass-like surface with tremendous force. I should have died then, but an airbag took the brunt of my impact. Dazed, I looked around. The sound that I heard coming from that thing was malformed yet familiar. The squeal of some demonic child soon gave way to the anguish and rage of an ancient intelligence which knew that faced almost certain death. The water was frozen and poured in through the now twisted open car door with such force that it winded me. I gasped for air as my unwilling prey now did. It writhed and twisted as it looked for an exit. Spying the open door, it pulled itself through the water towards me. I curled up my fist and I smashed it into that thing's face. Pieces of rotten flesh flaked off under the impact as a dark black liquid oozed from the resulting wound. Again it attempted to get past me, and I knew that to keep it in that car long enough to drown, that I would have to die with it. I felt numb as the frozen water slipped over my chin. My heart struggled against the cold, and with a sudden surge I was submerged, and it breathed my last. I held my breath, but only to compose and ready myself for an icy, suffocating death. I hoped it wouldn't be painful. My thoughts returned to Mary and my family as an all-consuming sense of sadness and despair overwhelmed me. But as I struggled with that thing, trying to get past me and through the door, grabbing and flailing with its arms, I looked down and saw it. Its leg was trapped between the dashboard and floor of the car by the impact of the fall. And although it could move, it could not leave. I turned immediately for the door. I could barely see but a foot in front of me in that black water, but there was enough moonlight to light my way. But as I got to the door, that wretch grabbed hold of me and pulled me back to it. It had given up all hope of escaping, but it wanted to drown me with it. We fought for what felt like an age in that cold, bitter grave. As the car slowly sank deeper into darkness, I could now feel my body pleading with me to take a breath, to exhale my last gasp of air, and then inhale the frozen water. I am happy to say that I used my wits to get out of such a horrible fate, orientating my body. I pushed my foot against the dashboard with enough force to at last escape its slippery grasp. I do not remember much else, bar the anguished and hate-filled scream that it let out as I left it to die at the bottom of that icy lake. I found myself walking through the wilderness, cold, wet, but alive. The wound in my shoulders slowed me down, but I kept the bleeding at bay by applying pressure to it. It took me 2 hours to walk home, and I am amazed that I did not collapse from exhaustion or hypothermia. When I saw the familiar side of the street I live on, I was filled with a sense of accomplishment, a sense of pride and triumph. I had beaten that thing once and for all. That is until I went inside my house and found a trail of large, wet footprints leading from the front door to the bed. Disbelief took me, despair so sharp and so overwhelming that I am unable to convey it with mere words. It was lying in my bed, waiting, a white sheet covering its emaciated body from sight. The human mind is a wonderful thing. Just as you believe your body has reached a level of exhaustion that it cannot recover from, that your emotions are so frayed that you feel you cannot continue, the thought springs as if miraculous from a weary mind. Let it rest for now. I quietly crept through the dark and picked up my wallet, which I'd left on a small coffee table in the center of my living room. Leaving the door unlocked, I left to attend to a new plan and return an hour later. With a moment's preparation, I slipped into the spare room. There I lay in that unsullied bed, waiting. I was sure that this was the end game, that instead of toying with me, it would come for the kill. How it had escaped that watery grave, I did not know, but I'd be damned if it escaped again. I could only hope that it would sense me from the other room. I closed my eyes, pretending to be sound asleep. Time lumbered onwards, and although I fought it, exhaustion finally took me. I woke up with its hands around my neck. It coughed and spluttered on top of me, a rancid black liquid dripping on my face as it oozed from its facial wounds. I struggled, gasping for air and hoping that I had the strength in me to escape its grasp, but it was too strong, and my hands could not grip it with any sense of conviction, as it seemed to be dripping wet from its plunge in the lake. It may not have seemed irrational at the time, but as my vision dimmed and the last light of consciousness extinguished within me, I did as so many animals do. I played dead. Lying motionless, holding my breath, it shook me violently by the neck and then released me. I waited for a moment. My last chance to destroy this thing. Its labored breathing relaxed slightly and seemed to stare at me almost quizzically. I waited still for a shift of weight, which might have let me throw it to the ground. Leaning down close to me, its wide, crumbling sneer puckered. I wanted to scream, to do anything, but I dared not move. The time was not right. Leaning in closer, it prodded and scratched at the wound in my shoulder, the pain shearing through me. Then it slowly and patiently slid 2 of its long, distended fingers into my mouth. The taste was horrible, rancid, rotten, dead as it arched its back in glee. I started to choke, and instead of being shocked, a garbled laugh emanated through its broken teeth. In our darkest moments, we sometimes find our true strength. I rolled to my side, using its weight against it, and finally managed to break free. I fell onto the floor, its long reach grasping at my feet. I kicked and screamed, and I was at last free. It stared at me only for a moment, rising up on top of the bed, its brittle bones cracking under its own force. It now towered tall over me. Since I was a child, I'd been a victim. It had terrorized me, taken my innocence, attacked Mary, and broken my life. I would not stand for it anymore. Sometimes the most dangerous prey is the one who can outthink you, the one that lulls you into a false sense of dominance or superiority, the one who has conquered any fear of you with a sense of anger and betrayal. It had fallen into my trap, one conceived by logic, reason, and an understanding of the world through the eyes of a scientific mind. Fire cleanses all. As it groaned, shrieked, cracked, and contorted, getting ready to pounce. In one swift motion, I removed a blanket from the floor, revealing a bucket filled with gasoline, which I'd bought in that short time of preparation. I threw it as hard as I could, the liquid splashing all over that horror in the bed. It grinned at me, mocking my very existence, making light of my pain and the agony it had caused. I pulled out a lighter, lit it, and threw it onto that horrible thing. It writhed and screamed in agony, parts of its flesh crumbling away, searing into nothing in front of my very eyes. Let it burn. The fire got out of hand. Thankfully, a neighbor heard the screams and saw the smoke, calling the fire brigade. I don't remember how I escaped. I spent several hours in hospital being treated for light smoke inhalation and painful burns to my hands. Still hurts like hell as a type, but as with many superficial wounds, they will heal. Perhaps there will be a few scars, but I can live with that. The police arrested me shortly afterwards, believing me a murderer. They suspect that I killed someone in that fire and find it entirely suspicious that I have a deep wound in my shoulder and scratches over my body. I've been told not to stray far in case they wish to ask me further questions, but they can ask away. I doubt they believe my answers. They found no remains, nor any evidence that someone else was there, bar a strange outline of a figure etched deep into the bed and wall. It looked as though whatever had been there attempted an escape, but I do not think it accomplished this. A weight has now been lifted from my shoulders, one which I now realize was always there since I was a child, in fact. I believe that thing had an effect on me, even from a distance. And now that it's gone, I feel whole again. I'm devastated I've lost Mary, and my house can be written off as I'll probably be charged with arson after they realize I started the fire. Which means I can kiss goodbye to any insurance claim. My hands ache, as does my shoulder, but my spirit does not. I'm writing this from a hotel room. It's small and unassuming, but it will suit my purpose. Tonight I intend to sleep and dream as I did as a child, before that wretch invaded my life. I believe that it was my rationality which saved me, my logical thought which allowed me to destroy such an evil. But I will never escape the conclusion that there is much more to life beyond the veil, out there in the darkness. It is a world I have seen and do not care to revisit. But tonight I will rest, and tomorrow I will build my life again with the confidence that my unwelcome guest is gone forever. I can feel it, and I know it. It'll take time for me to adjust, and perhaps my mind will play a trick or two along the way. It is difficult to abandon the paranoia of a lifetime. I must learn to accept my safety once again. I refuse to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my days, but I will always be cautious, as I was when I was in the hospital this morning, lying on a bed in a quiet ward. I thought I felt the bed shake for the briefest of moments, but I know that it was just my imagination. I am glad I have written down my experiences. It has illuminated much about myself to me. And most importantly, should anyone ever, God forbid, find themselves in a similar situation, then maybe you'll know what to do. Now it's bedtime, and I must rest, for I am tired. Good night, and sleep tight. So my roommate made up a game in which she sews together a creepy sock doll and pretends it's a live elf on the shelf. And she asked me to join. I mean, would you play that game? Why not name the doll Chucky while you're at it, right? So I played it. And let me preface this by saying last I checked, I was of sound mind, accepting my dubious choice of major philosophy, a degree that will allow me to think very deeply about the universe, and my lack of employment in it. I am a scholar and a skeptic, and I wouldn't believe any of the accounts I'm about to give if I hadn't seen the doll move myself. The doll, or rather, whatever evil force is moving the doll. It's real. It's walking around my house. It may or may not have disappeared our hamster, who often escapes her cage anyway. So, this could all be a coincidence. But still, as of this moment, Binky is missing. So prank, elaborate puppetry, hallucinatory episode. I hate all of those options, but since I can't come up with any better explanation, is anyone willing to help me with this? Alright, well, let's jump right in. Here's what's going on. I, Plato. I'm a fourth-year philosophy student, a major that explains why I am still broke and single. I live in a house with 3 roommates, Karen, Binky the hamster, and Kurt. It all started a few days ago with Karen's fab new idea to promote her channel. Karen is pursuing her degree in motivational makeup tutorials and clickbait, or as she calls it, marketing. She frequently drags Binky and me into her ongoing quest for likes, shares, and subscribers. Now, as much as I want to criticize the modern-day scramble for clicks, the hamster has a lot of followers. Anyway, Karen opened her proposal with, "Hey, this year for Halloween, we should play the doll game." "The doll game?" I replied. "Yeah, the doll game. It's like Elf on the Shelf, but you play on Halloween instead of Christmas and use a doll you make yourself." "Elf on the Shelf." I'd rather play it sty on the eye. You know, it's where I get a sty on the eye, and I go to the doctor rather than having to play this game. And okay, in my defense, it is hard to come up with catchy rhymes on the fly. Speaking of which, okay, this game sounds up. You make it up. Is this for your TikTok? I asked. No, she said, with huge doe eyes, lashes fluttering. I side-eyed her. And it's called the Doll Game. Doesn't it need a catchy name that'll let people know right away what it is? You know, like Elf on the Shelf? Doll in the Hall, she said. Folks, the brilliance that is Karen. Yeah, sure, I guess for Halloween, I said. Knowing we're in March, and I'd have a full 7 months before my required participation. This is a bad habit of mine. Present me often makes commitments that future me regrets. Cue Karen swooping in with a dose of instant karma for a present May. Oh my God, good. You'll do it. Sweet. You know, we don't have to wait for Halloween. We can try it now and see how things go and do it again if it's popular. She said, and I felt sort of tricked, but fine. We were playing with dolls in the hall. Not that our apartment even has a hall, really. So apparently this is a riff on some creepy game Karen found that went viral circa 2006 because it's a Japanese horror game. I mean, of course it is. This translates more or less to hide and seek alone, in which you make a doll, stuff it with rice and a bit of hair or fingernails. Yeah, the horror flavor text, because handmade dolls aren't creepy enough. And then put it in a bathtub, stab the doll with a sharp object, and tell it you're it. Then you go and hide, count to 10, and the doll comes searching for you. Now, if it catches you, it kills you with whatever implement you stab it with when. And you? Well, I guess you want a creepy doll, but you also lose because you spend hours making that doll whose only purpose is to kill you. And truly, do we blame the doll on this one? You created it, you brought it into this world, and then you stabbed it. You monster. Truly, a game where there are no winners, only sincere regrets. Fortunately, Karen's version is Doll in the Hall. It doesn't involve stabbing. Yeah, score 1 for lack of cruelty to dolls. Instead, in the days leading up to Halloween, you move the doll around, similar to the elf on the shelf. On Halloween, it comes to life for real when the spirits inhabit it. Nothing about this could go wrong, surely, right? But we were playing in March, so in Karen's words, it probably won't come to life. Right? Great. Now, my general reluctance to play had nothing to do with fears of the doll actually coming to life. Oh, if only I knew then. I just figured it would be a pain in the butt to play along for the camera every time Karen wanted to upload a new video tracking the movements of her homemade Frankendoll, and expecting me to be a willing actor. But I mean, it's not like she had a lot of options. Binky was already the star of 80% of her content. And our other housemate, Kurt, well, was Kurt. So down in the hall. Sure, I said. Let the games begin. Karen squealed in delight at that and actually hugged me. Which, okay, I'll admit my heart did palpitate a little bit because, okay, I have a small crush on her. And then she asked for a clipping of my hair or nails, and I immediately regretted every life choice I have ever made. Fingernail clippings. Gross, man. All right, a lack of hair it was. Now me, Binky, Karen, locks from each of us went in. The doll, sewn by Karen out of socks, looked what can only be described as the horrific love child of a demented sock monkey and a junky elf on the shelf fallen on really hard times. It had mismatched button eyes, sock arms, and legs, and a wire skeleton so that it could be extra terrifying, Karen said. It's not for scariness, it's so that it can be bent to different poses. Anyway, I vetoed rice as a filling material. I wasn't about to let her waste that much rice, nor was I willing to eat said rice after it had been mixed in with her hair clippings. So she used cotton stuffing. Some of our hair went in with the cotton, but she used most of it to make these weird little pigtails sticking off the top of its head. Cute once it was finished. We all sat around for a naming ceremony, which was really just an excuse for Kieran to make a promotional video. I suggested Cuddles. Kieran wanted to call it Boo Boy. I think she could call it Boo for short. Binky had the deciding vote, and no surprise, he voted with Kieran. Boo Boy it was. The game begins. Boo Boy spent the next few days appearing and disappearing from various locations around the house. Karen generally played dumb, asking me in that same Bambi-eyed way she always did when lying. Did you move, boo boy? I can't find him. Magnanimously, I played along. There was one day, though, where we really couldn't find him. I could tell because Karen came to me, asking where he was with a sly look. Apparently, she thought I moved him and was getting more proactive about being in the game. I wasn't. Now, I may have volunteered like a reluctant audience member pulled onto the stage for a magician's act, but I had no plans to cross the line from audience participant to magician's assistant. I've seen what they do to those assistants when they bring them the boxes and bring out the saw. When I did my usual stick of gosh, where could he be, Karen? And she realized I actually didn't know. She panicked, and it turned out it was Kurt who had him. Now, Kurt doesn't really interact with us, and he's not a student as to what he does. Mafia hitman, caveman, method adapter, head summoner for a cult bent on bringing a reign of supernatural terror into the world. I don't know. Pretty much nothing would surprise me at this point. He showed up with Boo Boy in hand, demanding what the hell is this voodoo doll? And I giggled nervously when he said that, while Karen took out her phone to film. Kurt snapped at her to get that camera out of his face and warned that it's a bad idea to mess with black demon magic. And then he stormed off, telling us he wasn't going to be involved in the game and he wasn't responsible for whatever bad shit goes down. Now, this was probably the most Kurt had spoken to either of us in a good 6 months, and I was a little concerned by this outburst. Not again because of any fears of the supernatural, but because I prefer to keep the peace between us. Also, it is his house, Karen, for her part. Was delighted by Kurt's overreaction, and she shut herself up in her room with Boo Boy to make another video about it. So far, so normal. But then, last week, things started getting weird. For example, on Monday, I was sitting on the couch reading philosophy. Nah, I'm kidding. I was on TikTok watching people ascend mountains of milk crates. I'm part of the problem, aren't I? Anyway, I was lost in videos of people tumbling from crate piles like inept mountain goats, and Karen was trying various filters on Binky. Binky with bunny ears, Binky with human teeth, Binky with Karen's face. It was weird. Anyway, suddenly Kurt's door just bursts open. He throws Boo Boy at us, his voice shaking with fury. I told you not to involve me in your voodoo shit, it's not funny. Next time either of you leaves this piece of shit dark magic thing in my room, I will rip it up and I will burn it. He slammed the door and Karen burst out laughing. Oh my God, she cried. Oh my God, I wish I had that on video. That was so good. Well played, Plato. That was awesome. It wasn't me, I said, frowning. Yeah, sure it wasn't okay. Next time, tell me when you're going to do that so I can record it, okay? Yeah. Did you hear him? I don't think there's going to be a next time if you want Boo Boy to make it to the end of this game. Also, it wasn't me, I said. Sure it wasn't. She snickered and winked. Winking is something Karen does at her videos to try and look conspiratorial with the audience. Being the subject of a wink, it made me think that possibly she was in on the whole thing and she'd done it. Although weird that she wouldn't have her phone ready to record. So after that incident, Boo Boy would periodically vanish and reappear in places that neither Karen nor I could explain. I assumed it was her doing, and she presumably assumed it was me. Now, none of the places were that unusual. We'd find him sitting on the shelf in our rooms or in a fridge, apparently raiding the meat drawer, hidden under the bed with his arms propped under his chin so he could look out, or peeking up at us from a drawer that was mostly closed. He seemed especially prone to appearing around Binky's cage, but I assumed that was just so Karen could get both Binky and Boo Boo in her videos. And then one day, Binky disappeared. Okay, enough is enough, Karen said, in a tone that indicated she was genuinely upset. Though at the time, I had no idea why. Where's Binky? I don't know, I replied. She's not in her cage. If she was in her cage, would I be asking? Maybe she escaped. Look, the top is off the cage and the bedding is a mess inside. It's obvious she was chased around by someone trying to grab her. Where did you put her? She asked. Okay, I don't know why you're coming at me. Maybe Kurt let her out for some reason. All right, it was not me. Kurt's out of town. He left yesterday. Remember? Binky was still in her cage. I didn't remember Kurt leaving for a week or two at a stretch was not unusual. I didn't bother to keep track of it. But Karen would not back down. She genuinely thought that I stole her hamster and possibly even did something to her. Why would I hurt Binky? I'm a vegetarian. I can't even watch movies where animals get hurt. A horror movie where the cat yowls or the dog runs out barking and then yelps in pain. I'm out and I told her this and Karen shouted. Okay, enough. So, did you take her to liberate her then because you hate cages? You're being ridiculous, I told her, which wasn't my most diplomatic, but I was feeling defensive. I don't lie. I never lie. And I wouldn't liberate a domesticated hamster from what is honestly a pretty cushy life, even if Binky is an unwilling social media star, like most influencers. She'd never make it in the wild. I pointed this out to Karen, but she was hysterical, worried about her Binky, and retreated to her room crying. And I felt bad for a few moments. In my attempt to diffuse her accusations with humor, I might have appeared to make light of the situation. In fact, I was very worried for Binky, too. I looked over at Binky's cage and froze. There were two button eyes looking out at me from the edge of the bookshelf beside the cage. Boo Boy's mismatched eyes and little pigtails bore an expression that I would term naughty, mischievous, evil. I stared for a moment, and without taking my gaze off it. Hey, Karen, you move, Boo Boy. No response. If she found Boo Boy by the cage later, she'd definitely get upset and she'd likely assume I put him there and was messing with her. I grabbed the doll. Bits of wood shaving clung to its sock arm. Frowning, I plucked off the shavings in hindsight. This should have been a red flag, roughly the size of Mars, the equivalent of the moment in a horror movie when the camera pans to the killer doll sitting there smiling with the missing dog's bloody collar and its porcelain fingers. The moment I usually nope out of any such film. But as I've said before, I, a rational person, do not believe in ghosts, I assumed. That Kurt had set this up before he left to pay us back for pranking him that one time. Or B, Karen had set it up all for herself and was now engaged in an elaborate dramatization, all in service of the gods of social media fame. And if it weren't for what happened later that night, I would still assume this to be the most plausible explanation. Anyway, I had decided I'd had enough of Boo Boy, and the best thing to do to end this before her game got way out of hand was to destroy it. First steps, I took Boo Boy into the kitchen and I snipped its arms off with scissors. I was intending to cut it up and toss it in the trash. Only while I was cutting, I began to feel a little remorse. After all, Karen's videos were important to her. She put a lot of time into this doll in the Haul series, and if I destroyed the doll now, well, she wouldn't finish. The least I could do was to destroy the video for her. So while I considered her accusations about Binky to be wildly overstepping, I retracted my behavior. I sewed back the arm and considered what to do with the doll then, and eventually I settled on hiding it. I'd agree to give it back if she stopped taking things too far and promised to just wrap up the game. So I hid the doll inside a locked box with my birth certificate, social security card, and other docs, a place Karen wouldn't dare search, and from which Boo Boy could not escape. I hit myself for this thought almost as soon as I had it. Even so, I made sure the box was extra locked and I tied a ribbon on it for good measure before shoving it in the closet. The key remained on me. Karen was still holed up in her room, and I could hear her making a video about Binky's disappearance and asking her followers for advice. This seemed to confirm my theory that the whole thing was an elaborate circus act for clicks. Presumably, she'd blame the doll later, and the show would go on. Great. Anyway, I buried myself in my readings and I thought nothing more of it that night. Eventually, I went to sleep. I woke in the dark, in the dead of night. At first, I wasn't sure what had awoken me, but when I clicked the light on, I frowned because my closet door was open. A faint whisper, a rustling, drifted to my ears from the carpeted floor just outside my door. Binky? Maybe Binky really had escaped. I got up, padding softly to the door, and I opened it. It was too dark in the living room for me to make out anything but dim shapes, but I definitely caught the sound of scurrying just before I'd reached the door. It was like something sounded like it was darting away towards the sofa. I fumbled around for a moment along the wall, and then I flicked a switch. My heart dropped my toes. The doll. Boo boy. I was walking. It took 2 running steps along the sofa before, like Woody in Toy Story, worried about getting caught. It abruptly froze, rose, and remained frozen, as if it had been posed there. I just stared, and the doll, it seemed, stared back. Karen? I called, but there was no response. I guess she was sound asleep. I strode over to the doll and snatched it up half, expecting it to come to life and writhe like a viper in my grip. But it was just dull now. Its buttoned eyes, though, seemed to be watching me. Okay, just my imagination, I told myself. I stepped to Karen's door and knocked, and when there was no response, opened it to soft snoring. Definitely asleep. There was no way she could have moved the doll and dashed to her room and into bed without me seeing. There'd been no one in the living room. No one at all. Just the doll. I flicked on Karen's light switch, thoroughly spooked. What's going on? Karen said. She asked if I'd found Binky. I told her no. And then I told her what I'd seen, and her eyes grew wide with fear. No, no, of course not. With delight. And then she got out her phone to have me do a freaking interview. My co-star Boop Boy alongside me. But the walking, it was real. I swear to you, it was all real. And I need your help. Karen won't give up playing this game with Boo Boy. And is it crazy that I think this might be dangerous? I mean, what do I do? Resolving ethical conundrums is supposed to be one of the few things my philosophy degree is useful for, but philosophy doesn't really cover, paranormal puppetry. After footage of the doll walking through our apartment went viral, people responded with many sensible suggestions, which I do wish I'd followed. Instead, I followed my housemate's much less sensible suggestion that we continue to play with dolls in the hall. Alright, so before we dive into this tragic comedy, an important update. We found Binky skittish and shaken, but otherwise okay. So for those of you whose greatest concern during the previous post was entirely for the hamster, rest easy. There's no animal endangerment this time around. We sent her to stay with Karen's sister. Do I blame you for being more concerned for a hamster than for me and my fellow humans? No, I do not. On this, you and I and Karen are in complete agreement. No one had better mess with our little Binky Poo. Not to be confused with Karen's other Boo, the ragdoll of nightmares. Now on to the big bad Boo. The situation. It all started out like a wacky sitcom. Cue title credits for Boo Boy and me, in which the possessed sock doll wanders around the house, engaging in increasingly wacky hijinks, to which my housemate Karen is always oblivious, much to the exasperation of yours truly. I swear you really moved, I say, mugging for the camera. Insert laugh track here. Now, these sorts of scenarios are so played out I can't even watch them on TV without groaning. Thus, I cannot even begin to express the frustration of having to play it out in real life. Nor can I count how many times I lay on the couch with my arm flung dramatically over my face, wondering if I've lost my marbles and thinking about my options, contacting the Catholic Church, prayer, exorcism, skipping town, and joining a commune in the woods. For example, the morning after my previous post, I was just grabbing more granola from the pantry when motion in my periphery caught my eye. Boo. It came strolling casually out of Karen's room. Can you believe that? Boo. I exclaimed. As I dropped the granola and pointed, and Boo Boy froze, Karen looked over and laughed. Good one, Plato. Insert laugh track here. This went on for literal days. And then on Sunday, I was in the middle of cleaning dishes when Karen's ear-splitting shriek launched me, so high I practically hit the ceiling. I dropped the plate into the sink, and I rushed into the living room. Karen stood with her hands over her mouth, and she pointed at Boo Boy, frozen in the middle of the floor, mid-stride. He moved, she said. Yeah, I replied. That's what I've been telling you. This thing's moving. It's freaky as shit, we should probably destroy it. What? No, she squeaked. He's our baby. Our what now? She snatched up the doll. Excuse me. This is your horror baby, not mine. I take no responsibility for this. It has your DNA, she replied. Your hair and Binky's. All 3 of us. Okay, first, I'm not sharing maternity rights with a hamster. And secondly, that thing. It's not a baby. Oh my God, you know what? I have to catch this on video, she said. Karen, do you not see how freaky this shit is? But she was already racing to get her phone. Cue interview with me again, verifying what she observed. Boo Boy, the monster love child of two humans and a hamster, strolling around our living room like some sort of discount Chucky. I was doing dishes when it happened, so I still had my apron on and my best scowl. It was all very domestic and also very raw. I was muttering about how I wished we just aborted my button-eyed co-star when Karen enthused. We should set up cameras with motion sensors. You like science, right? Shouldn't we science it? Yes, I do like science, but I also like being alive, and I especially dislike possessed dolls running around my home. Okay, didn't you base Boo Boy on some Japanese game where the doll tries to kill you? I snapped. Only if you stab it, she began. You haven't stabbed him, have you? Oh, shit, wait, you stabbed her, baby? I mean, not exactly. I guiltily explained about cutting its arm off and then sewing it back on. Oh, well, I'm sure Boo Boy understands. Like, if he were to snip off your arm, he'd probably sew it back, Karen began. I'm kidding. Besides, how's a doll going to harm you? He doesn't even have fingers. He can't hold anything. Yeah. He doesn't have muscles in those little sock legs of his either, but seems to be ambulating pretty well. Come on. He hasn't behaved in any bad way, she said, waving him at my face. This could be huge. Actual evidence of supernatural phenomena, like you and I and Boo Boy, could change the whole world. We'll be famous forever. And look, if it gets dangerous, we'll destroy the doll, I promise. Just 3. No, 2 days. We just need video. In the end, I agreed to her request that we continue to allow Boo Boy to wander unrestricted around the house because, and hear me out here, I'm an idiot. Now, before I explain how everything went predictably and horribly awry, a bit more of my motives and methodologies. Once upon a time, I was contemplating a career in veterinary medicine, and before anyone questions why I made the terrible decision to switch to philosophy, no, it's not because I enjoy being poor. I mentioned before, I think my reaction to the sounds of animals yelping in pain. It's why I noped out of the major and instead into one where I get to think about such profound questions as what is pain? How intensely do animals feel pain? So anyway, based on my dubious credentials of having finished 110th of a zoology major, I decided to begin our scientific inquiry with a question. Is the doll moving or being moved? That is it sentient, feeling, reasoning? And before we rush too far along this track, let's not put the carts before the horse. Okay, so I, as a zoologist, know that even the lowliest life forms exhibit a reflexive response to pain. You or a fruit fly, you yank off one of your limbs and you writhe. Boo Boy does not seem to react to such stimuli. So it is likely that Boo Boy is not of its own volition moving, but rather it is being moved, and the manipulating force is invisible to the naked eye and thus likely unobservable on the visible light spectrum, making the pet cams I purchased unlikely to capture evidence of it. But we can at least document its manifestation through its manipulation of Boo Boy and potentially other objects. It must have removed the ribbon from my lockbox, for example, and opened the box. Something Boo Boy could not have possibly done from the inside. I tried sharing my brilliant observations with Karen, but she said she'd leave the nerd stuff to me anyway. Since I still possessed more common sense, I told her that I'm removing all the knives, scissors, and sharp objects from the house. Just in case. And then, with the cameras rolling, we began to doll in the hall for science, capturing the perfect shot over the next couple days. Karen and I glimpsed Boo Boy angling along in the corner of our eyes so often that it became almost normal. We'd catch his little figure trotting in our periphery and turn our heads just in time to see him freeze. It was like a kid playing red light, green light, if the kid was a tiny sack boy with mismatched button eyes. And yet, even though he seemed to be almost constantly in motion, I counted an average of 4 times an hour, the cameras could never catch him. His movements were always too brief for the motion sensors, or he moved just outside their range. Often overnight, the cameras got knocked over. One pet cam fell face down recording the floor, and another fell against the window, and captured several riveting hours of the shadows and leaves. You get the idea. Now I kept a log of Boo Boy's activities. Most of his movements occurred in the living room, once in a while, the bedrooms or between rooms. Once we found him in Kurt's room, hiding under the pillow. Karen amusingly scolded him like a small child and told him not to go in there again, or you're grounded. She said insert a laugh track here. It was a very good thing Kurt was out of town during our Little Blue Boy and Me sitcom, because he likely would have flipped his lid. In fact, it was imperative we wrap up filming before he returned. But yesterday afternoon we surpassed the 2-day mark, and no footage by mutual consent. We continued the game, and then it happened. Karen was on her phone late last night doing one of her shoots in her room, talking about Binky. Apparently, her followers have been hankering for more hamster vids when she glimpsed Boo Boy and swiveled. She actually videoed him walking 3 whole steps. It was the perfect shot, and it immediately started to go viral. You may have noticed. If you try to search for the video, it's gone now. Almost as soon as it started racking up views, it got taken down and she deleted her account. Well, more specifically, I deleted her account because of what happened next. So Kurt came home within about 20 minutes of Karen posting our video of the doll Boo Boy, toddling around. And predictably lost his shit, he threatened to kick both of us out unless Karen destroyed both the video and Boo Boy, who was suddenly nowhere to be found. Karen physically blocked Kurt from entering her room to search. Bolivar, really, given not only is the man twice her size, but we have an ongoing bet about whether he's ever buried anyone in his backyard, she shouted. That she wouldn't take down the video, but would call the police if Kurt entered her room and then slammed and locked the door. Kurt swore and kicked the sofa. Hey, come on man, chill, I said. Do not bark orders at me in my own house. You unleashed bad mojo, man, he replied. Come on man, it's just a doll, I began. Just a doll? How you were playing with fire here, and you don't even know you're already burning, he said. He jammed his finger at me. Well, I'm not going to be collateral damage, man. If I so much as catch a glimpse of that thing toddling into my room, I will break its little legs, and then I will break your little legs. And then I will throw you both out on your asses onto the street to live in a box together, begging for money with your broken little legs. You get me? Well, honestly, I had to admire the guy's eloquence. I mean, dollars to donuts. He'd really do it. But hey, this dude could surely turn a phrase. Anyway, I was too stressed to sleep after that. Not only because Kurt's belligerent outburst had sent my heart rate spiking, but because after 3 days of Boo Boy moseying around in my periphery, his sudden absence, it was disconcerting. Not so much because I didn't know where he was at that moment, but because of the implications of his avoiding Kurt. You see, I've been operating as if Boo Boy's occasional movements were like ball lightning. Ball lightning? It's so rare that for centuries it had existed only in anecdotal accounts, and even now remains scientifically unproven. And while some accounts, especially early ones, have mistaken it for works of spirits or devils, there's no consciousness directing where the ball lightning appears or disappears. It's not a spirit moving with intentionality. And so Boo Boy's walking, it was like that in my mind, a unique phenomenon seemingly occurring at random around the house. But his dodgings of Kurt implied a degree of intelligence, sentience. And if the thing was capable of decision-making, not simply moving at random, but deliberately and with purpose, then what was its purpose? This is the question that suddenly, very deeply chilled me. And as I settled on a sofa, I began to wonder if in my mad quest for science and Koreans for clicks, maybe we'd gone too far. When I skimmed my documentation of Boo Boy's movements during Doll in the Hall, I found that I'd complained about Kurt's caution as overreacting. But I put down Boo Boy's walking all around our house as normal. Yeah, okay, my bad. My judgment may have been clouded. And it's possible we might have slightly lost touch with reality. Passed bananas and went full fruit salad. Boarded the crazy train man, commandeered it, and conducted it right off the rails. But now that I was searching for evidence of intention, I found that there was nothing in Boo Boy's movements to support that hypothesis. None save for the one single obvious choice, never to move when directly observed by us or by the cameras. Oh my God, the thing understands cameras. Kurt's warning came rushing back to me. You're playing with fire and you don't even know you're already burning. And so it was partly because I was too creeped out to sleep, partly to keep an eye on things that I stayed out in the living room, turning off the lights so as not to bother my housemates, leaving only the soft glow of the bathroom nightlight. I sat down on the sofa, adjusting the window shades to allow the moon's illumination to come in. And then I felt the pondering bad mojo. So there I was, mulling over the mysteries of existence. And then I saw a shadow in my periphery. I raised my phone before I even really noticed what it was. It was no larger than a cat, but more like a monkey in its movements, toddling out across the carpet towards Kurt's door with a whisper of fabric. "Boo boy?" I opened the camera app. Boo boy hid its back to me, and I don't think it had noticed me. When I clicked, a blinding light flared just for an instant. Boo boy's head turned. So in that moment of the flash, the doll's button eyes appeared to be staring right at me. As the light faded, I heard a quiet patter back towards Karen's bedroom. Her door clicked shut. Apparently, Karen was still awake, because a moment later, her door opened and she slipped out. "Did you see?" "Hey, Boo boy," I asked. She nodded. I was fumbling with my phone trying to open the image I'd taken, and as soon as I did, I froze. "What is it?" Karen asked. I don't quite know how to describe the picture. It'd be easier if I could post it. Only, I don't have the picture anymore for reasons that I'll explain. Honestly, I probably shouldn't even describe it to you. Not to be a tease or anything, I will describe it. I didn't bolster myself with 6 cups of coffee just to not write about the pivotal moment. But I will save it for the end, and I'll put up a warning that it's coming. That way, if you want, and if you're wise, you can skip it. According to Karen, looking at the image was the mental equivalent of taking acid, like the beginnings of a bad trip. Nausea, dizziness, hallucinations. For several moments afterward, everything in her periphery appeared to be crawling with snakeskin. The best I can describe is that it looked wrong, and it made my brain itch and crawl. My heart hammered, as if I just ingested caffeine straight into my veins. Every hair on my body stood on end, and the longer I looked, the less I could make sense of it. Through the sickening lurching of my mind, one rational thought came. My first hypothesis was correct. Boo Boy was being moved, manipulated by a force that hadn't triggered the motion sensors, but caught in the flash. It's like it was taken by surprise, unable to camouflage itself. Sudden terror struck me like a sucker punch to my gut, my nerves jangling and then tightening like violin strings ready to snap on the next note. We were both still staring at the picture when Kurt's door slammed open. "I can't hear you two whispering. What the hell's going on?" Karen and I just looked at him like two children caught red-handed over a broken cookie jar. Karen started to tell him it was nothing, but I showed him the picture. "Oh my God," he said, flinging one hand up to cover his face, and the other to shove my phone away. "My God, pretty sure he's not part of this," I said. "Plato, can you be serious, please?" begged Karen. "I am serious." "You need to burn that doll now," said Kurt. "Okay, just wait." "Okay, wait," snapped Karen. We all started to talk at once, but Karen shouted us both down, saying, "Will you just listen? We have to do this the right way. If we just burn it, we might unleash whatever this thing is. We have to do what she says. That's shut both of us up." "Who the hell is she?" demanded Kurt. And for once, I was in agreement with him. Karen flipped on all the living room lights, opened up all the messages on her phone, and introduced us. All aboard the crazy train. Karen's video had swiftly racked up thousands of views, including one by a woman who went by the handle of Psychic Death Lady 123, a self-proclaimed expert in dark summonings. She'd messaged Karen and told her she must get rid of the doll before the possessions advanced further, or the thing manipulating the doll would come for us. Karen hadn't fully believed her, but had nonetheless been in the middle of listening to her instructions on how to perform a cleansing ritual when my flash had caught the picture. I had my doubts about this so-called spiritual expert, whose primary credentials were beady eyes, an exaggerated British accent, and jeweled rings on every finger. But in a video call with Karen, she asked right off the bat about the game and who the players of our game were, proving that she had at least some rudimentary knowledge of our situation, or she at least knew how to Google it. Still, not like we were going to find a better paranormal puppetry expert on Yelp. Psychic Death Lady 123 instructed us to begin by deleting all photographic and video evidence of the doll. Why? I asked. Cue warnings about how the doll serves as a token, to which the spirit could bind itself in order to manifest in the material realm. Supposedly, the spirit could use images as substitutes for the token, if players were close enough in proximity to form a psychic link. But if we deleted everything, the spirit would have nothing to latch onto. The players, Karen, I, and Binky, yes, even the hamster, could then burn the doll in order to end the game and force the spirit back to the spectral realm. While Karen drove to her sister's house to pick up Binky, Kurt and I searched for Boo Boy, whom we found tucked into Karen's bed covers with his head in the pillow, as if he were sleeping like a little good boy. Good grief. Less than an hour later, we gathered around a fire pit outside from an iPad propped on a log. Psychic Death Lady 123 guided us through assorted rituals involving various symbols and invocations, and what I later found out was a $500 call. Apparently, there's an after-hours upcharge. Since Karen was holding Binky, the honor of closing out the game fell to me. Okay, friends, this has been fun, but we are now officially... Hurry up, Kurt interrupted. Right. Okay. So thanks for playing with the doll in the hall. Bye-bye, Boo Boy, I said, tossing the rag doll into the flames. Gigi, a horrific screech lit up the night. Then the doll's limbs curled and turned black, and the little pigtails of hair made for my. Karen's and Binky's locks sizzled and puffed into smoke. All three of us stepped back from the flames and covered our eyes, and soon there was only ash. Game over. And there you have it, folks. It's been one heck of a wild ride, and I'm a day late updating because this post took so long to write, but we have officially concluded Doll in the Hall. I'll update again if any weird craziness happens, but since we have obeyed the undeniable expertise of Psychic Lady Death 123. Okay, so update. First off, let's get one thing out of the way. The sock doll itself has not come back. His ashes have remained ashes. His dust has remained dust. So for those of you who were wagering on his return, sorry, the laws of entropy still apply. And in this universe, anyway, combustion is generally irreversible, meaning the doll in the hall, or at least the doll part of it, is officially concluded. So anyway, the days following the game's conclusion found us in a return to normalcy. Kurt was surly, Karen was in mourning. My channel. Why do you have to delete my whole channel? Gee, Karen, I don't know. Maybe because you summoned a demon and we'd all like to live to see another day. Anyway, life returned to the status quo. And to be honest, I sometimes miss seeing glimpses of Boo Boy trotting along the corner of my eye. I know, you don't have to remind me what was puppeting him. Believe me, I remember it. The figure, the demon, I still see. And I remember Psychic Death Lady 123's warning. Images summon it. And I worry that as long as I remember it, there's a chance of Boo Boy, that is the demon that was puppeting it, coming for me. I made the mistake of asking Kurt if he thought it was gone for good, and he gave me a look I will generously call displeased and stormed off without a word. A couple hours later, Karen and I each received an email from him informing us that he will not be renewing our leases. Go figure. And while inconvenient, I don't entirely begrudge him this dance. I mean, Karen and I brought a freaking demon into his house. It may or may not have been moseying towards his room to kill him when we caught it in a camera flash. So fair. It's fair. Anyway, final bit of normal news. Binky's back with us. But Binky bit Karen. Now, a hamster biting is not exactly newsworthy. Binky is pretty mellow as far as her species goes, but does occasionally get in a mood, especially if Karen feeds her too late or picks her up too much, or if Binky just, is generally feeling bitey. Happens to the best of us. But after the bite, Karen yelped and then set her hands on the cage. Staring down with such a wrathful expression, I stopped in my tracks. I was bringing coffee from the kitchen to the sofa in the living room. I thought for a split second I might have to do something, and then Karen turned away without a sound, walked into her room, and shut the door. Very odd. Under normal circumstances, I dismissed this interaction as Karen also being in a mood, but after the events of the past week, I was very vigilant for anything even slightly awry. Karen's normal reaction to Binky biting is to yelp and then scold playfully, often with video. Guys, oh my gosh, Binky is being extra today. Binky, you want to say sorry? She never not reacts to something, especially not to Binky, star of 80% of her content, and a primary source of clicks, especially with Boo Boy gone now. Concerned for her. I knocked on her door. Hearing no response, I knocked again. Finally, I opened the door and Karen was sitting at the desk, just sitting, staring, doing nothing, staring at her mirror on the vanity, at her own face, as if she didn't recognize it. Karen, I said, is everything okay? Her head snapped toward me. Her lips curved up, but it was a smile at her mouth only, almost as if the corner of her lips had been pulled up by invisible fingers. She seemed to struggle for words before saying, okay, Binky. Binky, she said again. Yeah, sure, Binky. She bit you. Everything okay? She replied. She grinned and raised her hand, making an okay sign with her thumb and forefinger. But this was clearly not okay. She was possessed by Boo Boy. Or else this was another attempt to start up a new channel in which she herself became the main attraction and videoed her jumpy housemates in a scary prank. I noticed that she was in fact videoing me, which lent some credence to the idea. I'd wind up on whatever new channel she was making as some sort of sap that got caught up in her act. It struck me as very cold that she'd do something like this, right after all that creepy stuff we went through, though Karen was nothing if not efficient in her self-promotion. Okay, look, I'm tired, I began. Can you just cut the act and be normal for a bit? And also turn off your phone. I don't want to be on your channel again, okay? Her smile vanished, and she nodded somberly. Yeah, sure. I'm tired too, okay? I narrowed my eyes at that. That sounded more normal, but not quite normal. I held out my hand. Can I borrow your phone? Yeah, sure. She picked up her phone and handed it to me, and then turned away and crawled into bed. You're, not getting up? I asked. I'm tired. She replied. Okay, I left her alone after that, but I brought her phone out to the living room and began madly searching through her accounts for any trace of videos or images I might have missed when purging Boo Boy from our lives. Nothing. Was she just having an off day on a hunch? I looked through my notes from when I was documenting all of Boo Boy's antics, and I noticed a trend that I neglected to mention in my previous post, where I basically simplified the data as he moves 4 times an hour. Which is true on average, but at the beginning, the first few times I glimpsed him move, it was considerably less than that, and by the end of the day we ended the game, Boo Boy was in almost constant motion, walking every few minutes. Also, his motion got smoother over time. Now I'm no Psychic Death Lady 123, but if I were to hazard a hypothesis about why his movements increased in both frequency and dexterity, given what we now know about Boo Boy not being able to animate himself, but rather being a puppet, I would have to say that in the beginning, the manipulating force was struggling to get a handle on him, trying from, I don't know, the astral plane or whatever, to just get the basics down of making Stuff Socks move. And as its control became more fine-tuned, it became able to move its puppet longer, more often, and with more precision. But that's the rub, isn't it? Boo Boy never came to life. Boo Boy was a puppet. In Doll in the Hall, who says the doll has to be made of socks? Doll in the Hall. I spent all afternoon thumbing through Karen's phone, searching for messages. They all looked normal enough. Nevertheless, I shot a message off to Psychic Death Lady 123, asking what were the chances of Boo Boy's spirit coming back without any sort of image to latch onto. And if it did, what viable solutions were there? Burning the doll was one thing. Obviously, we can burn my housemate. I was still scouring Karen's accounts for any clues as to what might be going on with her when the late afternoon sun was coming in through the curtains. Kurt had gone out early in the day and had not come home yet. I considered whether I should discuss Karen's behavior with him when he came home, but opted not to. On the off chance he actually did have a day job as a mafia hitman or something. Never can tell with that guy. My eyes were bleary from scrolling through sites on exorcisms, hauntings, and possessions when motion in my periphery caught my eye and I turned my head. Karen loomed over Binky's cage. My heart thudded. Hey, Karen, I called. And then I saw something in her hand. Karen. She was holding a small, furry fluff ball. I snatched her wrist, twisting, and she yelped and opened her fingers. Binky dropped into the cage, squeaking and rolling around in her bedding. "Hey, what the hell?" cried Karen. "What were you doing to Binky?" I asked. "I was holding her, geez. What the hell did you think I was doing?" She snapped back. Now this was normal Karen. Or at least she looked and acted like normal Karen. Certainly. Her flashing eyes and snarl were the Karen I knew. She was struggling, I said weakly. She needed to come out so I could clean her cage. She doesn't always like being picked up. "God, what the hell's wrong with you?" she said. You were acting strange this morning." "Oh my God, man. I'm tired. And you and Kurt destroyed my channel. I'm pissed off. Can't you just leave me alone? Come on, Binky." So I didn't really think I should let her take Binky. But the fact is, Binky's her hamster, not mine. At the moment, I didn't know what to do. Was she perfectly normal? And I was the crazy one, I wondered, while sitting there in the living room. Her phone is still in my pocket. Her phone. She hadn't asked for her phone back in hours because she was still in mourning. Maybe I waited tense, pacing the living room. 15 minutes later, Karen emerged from her room with Binky's cage freshly changed and set it on the shelf. Binky was inside, fluffing up her wood shaving bedding, and my heart pounded slowly with relief. Karen was obviously still very pissed at me for even suspecting that she'd hurt Binky. She didn't make eye contact with me and strode back into her room, slamming the door. So I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should arrange an exorcism for her, even though she's told me she's fine. Because, isn't that exactly what a possessed person would say? I have never, when asked if I were acting under the influence of demonic possession, said yes or maybe or oh, most definitely. So I'm aware this metric might need tweaking. I've also been checking my phone for any responses from Psychic Death Lady 123, and she finally responded a few minutes ago. Firstly, to tell me to just call her Marge. Note she didn't actually claim this is her name, just that she prefers it to. "Hey, Psychic Death Lady." She also asked for more info, so I copied and sent her most of what I've written. She replied back almost immediately with more questions. How is Karen's behavior now? And I have to admit, Karen came out about 10 minutes ago to microwave dinner acting totally herself, and glared daggers at me when I inquired, "How are you feeling?" Okay, so Karen's acting normal now. Does that mean we're in the clear? No. Psychic Death Lady 123, aka Marge, replied back that with the doll, there were times when it went inanimate. The thing puppeteering, it wasn't even there then. The same could be true for Karen. The times when the doll was inanimate are like the times when Karen is herself, this being more or less my deepest fear about the situation. I'm still sitting here trying to process it. Mind you, there's a part of me that still hopes, that this is all just Karen being Karen and messing with me for clicks or something. But of course, there's only one way to find out. One aspect of this whole experience that is unalterably real and forever burned in my brain as evidence of the beyond is that picture. I asked if I should take a picture of her. Marge had said no. Assume she is possessed. Do nothing but put the hamster somewhere safe. I will be there tomorrow. $500 for examination, $1,200 cleansing, $2,500 exorcism, or all three for $3,500. Wow, what a racket. Her in-person prices are sky-high compared to Zoom. I'm pretty sure I'm being taken advantage of, and I almost wrote that back, but I weighed my options, ongoing paranoia for myself and Binky, and the possibility of an untimely horrific death or a one-time payment to a possible huckster. Okay, I said back $3,500. Let's do it, Marge replied. Done. Send the hamster away. Do nothing tonight. I'll be there at 2 p.m. I replied back. I can't wait. My sarcasm was lost on Marge, resulting in an ensuing back and forth in which she asked why I couldn't wait and told me she could be here sooner for an additional $2,000. And I tried to explain the definition of sarcasm. I think I just pissed her off. Anyway, she's on for tomorrow, and now that I've said this, I do feel a little better. I definitely can't afford that much. Probably going to have to wheedle Karen into helping with the cost, which is going to be a very awkward conversation. But hey, it could give her some great content for her channel. Shit, 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 shit. Shit, I can't think. I can't think. I'm having a panic attack. I shouldn't have made all those jokes. Do I leave them? Does it matter? I don't know what to do. Okay, okay, this is what happened. I'm just going to tell you. I just found Boo Boy. Not the doll. A drawing. A pencil sketch in Karen's notebook. I'm guessing she drew it after we already burned him, because it says Boo Boy Rip. She probably thought that a drawing, since it's not an exact replica like a photo, wouldn't count. God, Karen, how could you be so stupid? Okay, I can't blame her, but here's my supposition, and I hope I'm wrong. Please let me be wrong. See, Boo Boo was not just made from our socks, but also from clippings from our hair, bits of us, and Karen herself stitched him together. And this is a bit me spitballing here, but I think the act of creating him, of hand-making him, is part of what bound the entity to us, the players. Marge said an image could be used by the spirit as a substitute for the token. Now, a drawing may have the exact details that a photograph has, but like the original Boo Boy, it's handmade, personal. This would make a drawing even more powerful as a substitute than a regular image. Oh my God, I can't. I just can't. It's a shame that Karen is so artistically talented. If it were me, we'd never have to worry about this, because I can only draw stick figures. Any malevolent entity would be too embarrassed to use one of my kindergarten scrawls for possession. Okay, I have burned the picture. It's gone now. I'm just going to have to say this. I shouldn't have joked so much. I'm shaking. My hands are still shaking. With a drawing gone, you'd think I'd be able to calm myself down. But come on, you're smart. You can guess as much as I can. I probably could have pinned that picture up on the wall, couldn't I? I could have copied and pasted 1,000 of him all over the house. I could draw a Boo Boy myself in pen and ink or permanent marker. Or if I wanted to be particularly gothic and authentic about it, in my own blood, with bits of my hair pasted on for good measure. Heck, I could make an entirely new Boo Boy. Boo Boy 2.0, and this time give him teeth so he could be 500% more terrifying. It totally wouldn't matter. None of it would matter. Because the thing doesn't need Boo Boy anymore. It's already attached itself to its new puppet. Karen is the new doll in the hall. Excuse me if this post lacks the levity of previous entries. I don't even know why I'm updating. What's the point? A question about what really is the central premise of my philosophy degree. So you'd think, having spent so many hours pondering the meaning of it all, I might have come up with some answer. Loyal readers will remember that Psychic Death Lady 123, aka Marge, was scheduled for an appointment with us this afternoon. Unfortunately, she relayed to me that she had car trouble delaying her arrival to closer to 9 p.m. or even tomorrow. I'm not sure if a more punctual appointment would have made a difference anyway, since it's hard to imagine some kooky middle-aged huckster dealing with an actual demon. But who knows, maybe her broken alternator is the single event in the universe. Anyways, it's a bit too late now. 3 hours ago, 5 p.m., Kurt was still away on some trip he left on a couple days ago. I needed some air, so I went out. I ended up going for a walk, wishing Kurt would arrive home, because I was so anxious I didn't want to come back inside, to face whatever was Karen on my own. Maybe I was feeling some sort of premonition, but eventually, it just got too cold out. When I got back, the curtains were drawn and the blinds closed. I came into the living room, and it was dark. Karen was standing right there, a shadow just standing in the dark room. Karen, where's Binky? She demanded. I moved her. Why? Binky's mine. How dare you touch her? You were acting strange. You still are, I said. I'm acting strange. You're the one who took my phone, keep sneaking around, and you stole my hamster. Well, I had my sister bring her back while you were out on your little walk. She's in my room now, you psycho, and if you so much as set foot inside my room. Karen, I interrupted. No, do not Karen me. You've been acting like a lunatic all day, and yesterday, and ever since that damn ceremony. You haven't slept, have done nothing but drink coffee and type on your laptop. I just saw you pacing around back and forth outside in the dark, like some kind of creeper." And as she yelled, I realized she was right. My behavior had been strange, but also she was wrong. My behavior was the behavior of someone frightened. And I took out my phone. She may have sounded normal, but something was off, and I snapped a picture of her. I didn't see the knife in her hand, I swear. In the dim, the flash went off automatically. Karen shrieked, throwing a hand up, and when I could see again, she was gone. And then I saw the motion above. Karen was on the ceiling. Eyes rolled back in her head, mouth gaping, as if she just lost control of her jaw, like a puppet on which the hinge is loose. Her face was slack, and she moved 2 crawling steps above me on the ceiling like a spider, hair dangling. I caught only the briefest nightmarish glimpse before she dropped on me, and I screamed. I don't remember the next moments, just that we struggled with her knife. And I swear I didn't see her eyes flick around to me until it was too late. It all happened so fast. Somehow, I don't know. Somehow, shit, for a second, she had this look in her eyes. "Hey," she said, all confused at me. "What are you?" And then I stabbed her in the chest with a knife, and she made this sort of a gasping sound, and I backed out from under her. Oh God, Karen. She fell over then, and her body was still there, still on the floor, blood pooling underneath, staining the carpet. Now I look at her empty eyes, and all I can feel is a profound hollowness. I found gas cans in Kurt's garage. Who would have thunk it? Also, for what I'm about to do. I'm sorry, Kurt. You can keep my security deposit. You see, there's one more thing I have to do. Well, 2 things if you count this video. I figured it out. I figured I'd post one more time, wrap things up. Let you know what happened at least. Let me know. So when you read about me in the news and you learn my real name, you'll know the truth. I have to end this game. I can't risk Marge or Kurt or the police showing up here when I'm not. Myself, which is obviously where all this is leading. So I'm going to end the game by removing all the players. I'm so sorry, Binky. I'm so sorry, Karen. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. She wanted to stop. After I'd set up the cameras and Boo Boy was walking around, she got nervous and she thought about ending it. And I wanted to get proof so badly. Look, Karen, you yourself said this could be the greatest discovery of all time. Let's just get some footage. The first footage ever of a supernatural occurrence. And on your channel, think about it. I convinced her to keep playing. I fought to keep going until I got the picture. I deleted the picture. No one will ever see it now, which means that no one will ever fall under possession of this thing. There'll never be any players but us. I'm taking care of everything. Karen, don't worry. Everything is going to be okay. All that's left is to light the match. And whatever I say next, it'll be my last words. And I cannot think of an appropriate phrase to go out on. I know it's dumb. I have spent much of my life staring at the screen, trying to come up with some perfect final line. Plan your last words early, kids. This video is ready to go. And most of the links are updated. The last ones I'll do once it's up. Shit, at this point, I'm terrified. So I'm going to hurry up, and I'm just going to do this thing. I want to light it up. This experience has sucked, by the way. 0 out of 10 would not play again. I was 15 years old when I saw the things in the woods. I never really believed in that stuff. Campfire stories, spirits, cryptids, whatever you call them. I always had a logical explanation for everything. That all changed the last time my dad took me hunting. It was 2 months before my 15th birthday. My dad was taking me hunting in a state park over in Logan County, West Virginia. I had little to no idea what was going on. I just knew I had to try along. He took me to target practice a couple times, but we ended up spending most of our time discussing gun safety. Dad had been sick on and off for a long time. He'd had a work accident and just started to really recover. This would be our first outing in almost 2 years, and the whole family was excited for it for different reasons. It was an early September morning when we set out. Mom waved goodbye from the kitchen window. Dad had packed enough stuff to cover us for a whole week, but we were only going away for the weekend. We pulled into a drive-thru, got some lunch, and met up with his hunting buddies. There was Cisco, a man in his late 50s, mostly working in accounting, and had no concept of how to speak at any appropriate volume. And then there was Abe. He was in his mid-40s, and he had some relation to Cisco, but I never really understood what it was. I think Cisco was married to his older sister. I don't know. And finally, there was Hugo. He was new in my dad's work and just kind of wanted to belong somewhere. Guy was quiet as a mouse, and he had this intense raccoon-like face. It was a long trip. I was on co-pilot duty, meaning I was to respond to any texts and provide snacks to the driver, and of course in charge of music. It was exactly what I wanted out of that trip. The hunting itself, I don't know, wasn't that important. It was nice to just see him happy again. This was his element. Something he'd done with his dad and that he was doing with me now. We were the last to arrive. Cisco and Abe had packed enough for a small company of soldiers. Hugo barely had anything at all. Dad parked, shut the music off, and from that point on it was all business. I wasn't that amped about it. We double-checked our equipment and set out due west. Cisco and Abe took point, with the rest of us following in a line. I zoned out for most of it, to be honest. I drowned myself in music and texting. Dad was busy talking to his hunting buddies, and Hugo wasn't much company anyway. We went deeper and deeper into the park. I didn't even realize until 3 hours in that I did not have the slightest idea where we were. We'd followed so many paths that we could have ended up anywhere. It was somewhere around lunch when we decided to make camp. My feet were already sore from the new boots. Cisco gathered rocks for the campfire, while Dad and Abe started to plot out where to go next. It was decided that we were splitting up in teams. I was going with my dad. Abe went with Hugo and Cisco. Well, he went on his own. He was by far the most experienced out of all of us, and we all knew that he wouldn't catch anything if he went with someone. The man just couldn't control his voice. I jumped every time he talked. Well, we didn't do any actual hunting that afternoon. We spent some time just getting to know the area. I had no idea what to look for, but Dad kept pointing at things and telling me how close we were, how these were telltale signs I couldn't really follow, but I tried to be supportive. I had not seen him so enthusiastic about anything in forever. We ended up looking across a clearing somewhere around dinner time. Dad had this can of Vienna sausages that we shared on the far side of the field. There was a thin stream running along the tall grass. That's where we'll spot him in the morning, he said. Guaranteed. We spent the rest of the day trekking along the edges of the field, trying to find a good spot. We ended up making a dig on the eastern side so we wouldn't get the morning sun in our eyes. We made a wind shelter from pine branches and moss big enough for both of us heading back to camp. We went through our checklist of gun safety protocols again and again and again. As we did, there was a loud bang somewhere off in the distance. We both stopped. We knew the others had brought their guns along, but had they already found something? That was unlikely. Dad put a hand on my chest, signaling me to stop. Could be other hunters, he said. Gotta stay on your toes. We all met up at base camp. Dad went around asking the others which one was the mysterious shooter, but nobody fessed up. Could have been anyone, really. Abe and Hugo had split up to check different areas, and Cisco was off on his own. I figured it was Hugo that fired a shot accidentally. Didn't want to make a scene. He kind of had the look of it. At night, they all shared some hunting stories, mostly Cisco. He went on and on about hunting alligators from a riverboat, how he wouldn't believe the size of those things, and how they were big enough to swallow a man's torso in a single bite. When that stopped impressing us, he went on to talk about sport fishing Atlantic yellowfin tuna. I turned in early that night. Dad got me my own tent, so I spent most of my time watching stuff on my phone. We had chargers and solar, but I hadn't unpacked it. Once the batteries ran out, I just lay there on my back, waiting to fall asleep. It was a terrible sleep at best. I'd accidentally set the tent up on some kind of route, leaving me with a bruise on my right shoulder. There was also the constant buzzing of a wasp beside my head. I think the thing didn't get through the tent, but my God, it tried. We got up just before sunrise. It felt like I just barely shut my eyes. But Dad, he was at the top of his game. He was bouncing between the tents. He was humming and double-checking not only his own equipment, but everyone's that whole morning. It was basically just my dad trying to get us excited. Hell, even Cisco was tired. We had breakfast, went over our plans, and got into gear. It was game time and the sun wasn't even up yet. I was half asleep all the way out there. I almost tripped twice, but Dad pressed on. We got to our makeshift shelter and made ourselves comfortable. Dad kept talking about the direction of the wind and various techniques he used. I was trying to pay attention, but I don't know. I kept nodding off. He didn't seem to mind, though. I think he was just happy to be there. I don't know how long we waited. After a while, as things turned quiet, I couldn't really tell the time anymore. All sort of blended together. At some point, Dad elbowed me, and there they were. 6 of them in total. 3 does, 2 yearlings and a buck, all strolling into the middle of the field without a care in the world. Dad nodded at me and eyed the rifle. "You're up," he said with a pat. We had about 55 to 60 yards of distance and a clear view. I was nervous, though. I'm really nervous. We'd practiced plenty, but this was different. I could imagine them scattering to the wind and our one shot at this blowing up in our face. Dad didn't seem to care, though. But, I don't know, I wanted to make him proud. I brought the gun out and rested my head, letting the whole iron sight fill my view. I felt the weight of the trigger as I brushed my finger against it. Inhale. Exhale. You got this. And then a gunshot, and it wasn't mine. The deer thundered off into the woods. Dad just lay there slap-jawed. There was no way to tell where it had come from, but it was close. Maybe someone had taken a shot at the same deer as us. We looked across the field for someone to stand up or show themselves, but there was nothing out there. Dad put a hand on my shoulder. "That's not on you," he said. "I don't know what the hell that was." We tried to reach the others through our walkie-talkies. Cisco reported first. Apparently, he'd heard the same thing, but from a far different angle. Hugo reported in too, telling us the shot had been close, and finally we waited for Abe, but nothing came through. We waited longer, listening to the static. Cisco interjected with the occasional Abe check-in, but we got nothing in response. "Hugo, where the hell are you?" growled Cisco. "You were supposed to partner up." Hugo's voice crackled through the radio, explaining how they were by the cliffs. "Then where the hell is he?" Cisco said through the static. Hugo tried to explain, but Cisco cut him off. I could hear a tremble in his voice. "Just answer the damn question," Cisco roared. Dad shot me a look. Cisco was always loud, but this was something new. Hugo met up with us over at the Southern Trail. We followed it for a good 45 minutes, calling out to Abe as we went. The quiet stutter of the walkie-talkie felt like getting poked by an icicle. It started to dawn on me that this might turn from a hunting trip into a rescue mission. We all moved up the trail, stepping over fallen trees and brush as the forest breathed. We could see further and farther ahead. It was quiet, like something had scared off the birds. We spread out for a search, not by a lot, but enough to cover some ground. We still had eye contact with each other. Dad asked me to stay close, but I wanted to help, so I took the space in the middle. Everyone called out to Abe, not caring about the deer or other wildlife we spooked. But apart from a few strange red birds perching on nearby pine, there was nothing around to spook, and the birds didn't really seem to care about us. After a while, it didn't even sound like a name anymore. It just became this call like, "Abe, Abe, Abe." And then I saw something. I thought it was a log at first, but it wasn't as I got closer. I was met with Abe's eyes looking up at me. They didn't blink. It looked like he just tripped and was about to get up, but he wasn't moving. He had his neck at a weird angle, like he was trying to brush something off his ear or with his shoulder. And then I noticed the bullet wound straight through the heart. I'd never seen one before. Not on anything living. Not like this. To this day, I can't stop thinking about that for a second when I realized what I was looking at. The absolute panic ran through my lungs, causing my words to just freeze. I stopped and stared at him, watching the unmoving eyes and how they seemed to watch me. I didn't realize I'd stopped yelling his name. The others rushed over. Dad put his hand over my eyes, turning me away. I could still see Abe's face behind my eyes. Hugo started making this wailing noise, and Cisco just turned deathly quiet. Cisco immediately turned to Hugo, taking his rifle away. Hugo let go of it like it was on fire. Cisco tore out the magazine, only to find it unused. When it finally dawned on Hugo what he was doing, I could hear his breathing grow sharp. Hugo started shaking his head. "You got spare rounds?" "That's Cisco." Hugo held out a small box of ammunition, dropping half of them in the moss. This just pissed Cisco off even more. He was in no state of mind to do any counting. Dad tried to call 911, but we couldn't get through. We were too remote, and his phone was about a decade old. He wanted to try mine, but I'd forgotten to charge it. Finally, Hugo gave up his phone and stepped back. He was holding up his hands like he was being arrested. Cisco was losing his mind, growing louder and louder. Dad redialed 911 and got a signal. As soon as that operator picked up, it was like all his words just dropped off the face of the earth. And then another gunshot. Dad pulled me. Down into the grass, Hugo dove behind a tree, and Cisco went prone behind a stump. As the sound echoed through the trees, we all held our breath. Dad grabbed my face, and he kept assuring me that I was okay. Nothing came of it. We were all fine. Dad looked around for the phone, listening for the operator. We scanned the tree line, but we didn't see anything. Dad went for the phone. Another gunshot closer. This time Dad pulled his hand back and held me tight. I could hear his heartbeat. We spread out, called Cisco. We spread out and called for help on my count. Dad propped himself up on one knee and got me to do the same. He'd be facing the way the bullets came, shielding me. There was no time for me to object. Cisco counted down from 5. It was so hyper-focused that I forgot to breathe. As the countdown ended, we all ran. Dad and I burst into a sprint towards base camp while Hugo went in Cisco, headed us up the hills. We kept our heads low, praying to God we wouldn't trip on anything. I have never ran that fast in my entire life. We just kept going down a trail, past a landmark stone and beyond, and I only had a vague idea of where we were, but I didn't stop to look around. Somewhere in the distance I kept hearing gunshots. Not a lot, but every so often. And with each one, my heart skipped a beat. As we stopped to catch our breath, Dad got out the walkie-talkie. "You see the shooter?" He wheezed. "Does anyone see him?" Silence. "Cisco," Dad called into the radio. More silence. "Cisco." We made our way back to camp. We figured we could use my solar charger to get my phone up and running and try to call for help again. It was still early in the day, but it was very easy to get lost even with clear weather. I had a general heading, but that was about it. We took it real slow, crouching between trees and between outright sprints. We kept our heads low, listened, and watched for birds taking flight. All the while, I couldn't help but feel like something was up. If there was someone else moving out there, we would have heard them by now. Sound traveled far, especially in this open area. When we finally made it back to base camp, I dove into my tent. I fumbled out the solar charger, plugged it in, and set it up outside. Dad moved it so it wouldn't be so easy to hit with a stray bullet. We hunkered down behind one of the tents. We didn't move a muscle. My body was cramped from staying still, but I didn't want to move despite the pain. "It's all about the waiting," Dad whispered. "Just like hunting." It must have been close to lunchtime when my phone lit up with a mild yellow light. It had about 30% battery charge, but it looked like the weather was about to change. There had been a few clouds on the horizon, and Dad had warned us about rain. A bad enough cloud cover would mean we'd be wasting time waiting for nothing. While Dad tried 911 again, I stuck to the walkie. I tried a few hellos, but I got nothing. The thought hit me that maybe they were hiding. If so, would my voice give them away? Abe's face flashed before my eyes as I put the walkie down. Waiting for someone to reach back from the other side, Dad tried his best to explain our position. Yeah, we got a shooter, he said. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe 1 to 2. I just west of Dad put the rifle down and held the phone to his ear. He was trying his best to work out on a map exactly where we'd been at. I couldn't help but to stare at the rifle. There might be one of those things hunting us right now, and we'd have no idea of knowing they could have a clear shot. They could be anywhere. He stayed on for 10, maybe 20 minutes before the battery ran dry. He was so frustrated that he couldn't contain it. They told us to get moving and meet him halfway. He spat, "Don't bring anything. We'll get it back later." With that, he grabbed the rifle and we left. We got turned around a couple times when the rain came. Things started to look the same and we had no proper source of light. We kept trying to head in a straight line, but it became painfully clear that we'd messed up somewhere around the half-hour mark. We'd gone off track, and we might be heading further into the park. We tried to backtrack, but we couldn't find any landmarks. There was supposed to be a tall tree along the path, but there wasn't. We must have taken the wrong path. I hadn't really paid attention when we first got there, so I had to rely entirely on my dad. And Dad, he was not doing so good. It was pouring now. It felt like it was raining sideways. I had to curl my hands up into my armpits to keep warm, and I kept getting slapped by branches. And then in the distance, another gunshot. I could barely make it out in the rain, but there was a cling to it that just struck through me. There was something primal to it, but my hearing was tuned to catch it that I don't know exactly. And then another closer. I dropped to the ground and Dad got behind a tree. Before he had a chance to ask, I yelled back. I was okay. I had to repeat myself 3 times before I saw him relax, his shoulders slumping against the tree. "Stay down," he said. "I think I saw something." I tried to see what he was looking at, but he yelled at me to stay still the moment I moved. He refused to have any part of me exposed to gunfire, no matter what, and yet I think I saw something movement further down the tree line. He crouched down and rested the gun on a branch. I could hear him trying to control his breathing. He squinted through the sights, counting to himself as he did. I kept my head down, waiting for the next shot. I don't know how long we stood there. 10 seconds, 10 minutes. I don't know. But all we heard was rain and crackling branches. All we saw was pine trees. I kept looking at my dad. He was the only thing I could see. He kept staring straight ahead, just breathing. And then I saw something. Something fast. "Duck," I shouted. Dad, I haven't seen anything like that ever since. It was tall, and it had this strange green tint to it. It had 2 legs, but not like a person. Much taller than 6 feet wide-set legs with long arms that I think they scraped across the forest floor. A single finger on its right hand was longer than my entire arm. Its head had a shape like a thorn bush, with little blinking appendages all along what should be the scalp. It twitched forward, and as it did, the long fingers snapped straight through the tree where Dad was taking cover. The sound of another gunshot rattled through us. This one was deafening. I saw something explode out of the other side of the tree as the force burst straight through the trunk. It blasted Dad's face with something like shrapnel. He threw himself backwards, covering his bleeding face and dropping the rifle. It circled around him in a sort of crab walk, raising its long finger like a scorpion's tail. And then I grabbed the rifle, swung it around, and I did as I'd been instructed down the iron sight. Exhale. And this time I didn't hesitate. As a real gunshot rang out, the creature reeled back. Every little white slit along its head was opening and closing. Blinking in unison, it was gone in an instant, scrambling on all fours to get away. I think I hit it in the shoulder, revealing something bright green, like a snapped twig. I was breathing steady and calm, but I was terrified. I could feel this intense heat under my clothes, despite the cooling rain. "Hold it steady," he said. "Finger on the trigger." He'd gotten something in his eyes, I saw. I don't think he could see anything. It was up to me. And then far off into the woods, another gunshot, then another, then another. All around us, gunshots were piercing the rain. But they weren't just gunshots. What should be these high-pitched explosions started to twist and ache, some turning long and low like a stalling engine, others reverb like a wail or heartbreaking cry. One of them kept splitting out gunshots that sounded like small arms fire, a semi-automatic pistol, and far off in the distance was something with a high caliber. Something deafening. "Look beyond the scope," he said. "Down the line. Watch between the trees," he instructed me. And I did. Despite the rain, the ache and the panic, I held that rifle like it was my life for hours. There was nothing but rain and gunfire. I'd catch glimpses of something moving in the distance, sometimes straight ahead, sometimes from the flank. Sometimes I'd fire, hitting a branch or the side of a tree. And sometimes I'd hit something, causing a loud gun-like squeal to echo back at me. And one by one, our bullets started to run out. Cartridge after cartridge started to pile up under us. And then, at some point, it stopped. I remember the rain clearing. The final cartridge lay hot in the grass. Dad put his hand on me. "That's enough," he said. "It's okay." As I put the rifle down, I felt a barrier collapsing. There was nothing between me and what was out there anymore. It was over, and we were just waiting for that final gunshot. But it never came. Instead, we saw forest rangers. Maybe they hadn't been that far away to begin with. In the aftermath, we found that both Cisco and Hugo had made it out. Cisco had dropped his walkie as he ran, but had taken shelter in a fishing cabin. Hugo had kept moving in a wide half circle, making his way back to his camouflage shelter. But Abe, he didn't make it. They called it a hunting accident, but could never pinpoint it on a single individual. Dad was beyond himself, questioning every decision he'd made down to the line. He questioned the fact that none of the Rangers had heard the gunfire to begin with. There was no way they hadn't, he said. "I've since heard all kinds of stories coming from the same area. Random gunfire scaring off the deer. That seems to be a common story. A lot has happened since those days. I still keep a gun for protection, and my dad lost most of his vision. He's still around, but we don't talk about it anymore." Mom never really got the full story either. We've never gone back there. We've never heard of anyone else seeing them. Honestly, I don't think I really want to know. And nowadays we stick to fishing. I've lived here my whole life. It's not much of a place. No name, no fame. The locals call it the swamp, even though it's not. It's a town. Feels like a swamp, though. Always wet, always gray. The air smells of salt, so strong it sticks to your skin. The clouds never leave, the rain never stops, and mold creeps into everything on the walls of the boats, even the old wooden houses. That's just life here. You don't question it, you live with it. Most people make a living off fishing. That's been the way for centuries. There are no big offices, no schools for fancy things, just boats, nets, and the ocean. It's an honest living, even if it's tough. Pull in what you can, trade it in town. If you're lucky, you're catching out for bread. A couple beers, maybe a coat for winter. If not, you tighten your belt and try again the next day. Me, I'm a part-time fisherman, part-time tourist boat guy. I take folks out on the water, those curious enough to visit this place. There's nothing really pretty here. No golden beaches, no clear skies, just gray rain and black waves. But every now and then someone shows up, drawn by the stories. Spirits, monsters, curses. Everyone loves a good scare, don't they? People come with their cameras, notebooks, and gadgets. They ask about the history, the weird stories, the things locals never talk about. Always digging, but something always happens to them. I'm just a fisherman. I don't have the answers they're looking for, and I don't try to stop them. My job's simple. Take them out on the boat, point out landmarks, share the safe parts of the stories, and bring them back. What they do after that is their business. Still, I've seen enough to know better. Live here long enough and you learn the rules. Not rules on paper. Rules you feel in your bones, the kind passed down in whispers. If you're smart, you follow me. If you're not, well, you don't last long. Take the kids, for example. They don't play outside after dark. No one has to tell me. They just know. It's the same with the fishermen. There's a stretch of water to the west. We don't fish. Nobody explains why we just don't. And there's a church in town, a rotting little thing with a leaning steeple. The door's not even locked, but nobody goes inside. Not ever. People like me don't ask questions about these things. Questions are for tourists. I've lived here long enough to know there aren't any answers worth finding. It's better not to dig too deep. This place isn't kind to curiosity. I remember one guy, a big city type with a camera and a voice recorder. He asked me about the stories, the church, and the Western Water. I told him what I told everyone. It's just stories. Nothing to see here. But he wouldn't let it go. Kept poking around, asking the old timers, sneaking into places he shouldn't. A week later, he was gone. Left town in the middle of the night, or so people said. Nobody saw him leave. His car sat outside the inn for days, and then one morning, it wasn't just gone like he'd never even been here. People don't talk about it. They just shrug and move on. That's how it is here. This town has its ways you don't mess with. Tourists think they're chasing the supernatural lost treasure, whatever keeps them up at night. They think this place is like all the others they've read about online, but it's not. They don't understand. It's not the stories that are dangerous. It's the place itself. This town does not like outsiders. It barely tolerates the people who've lived here all their lives. You keep your head down, follow the rules, don't draw attention, and you survive. But I'm just a fisherman. What I know about any of this? I take my boat out, haul in what I can, and bring it back. When tourists come, I show them around, tell them what they want to hear, and drop them off at the dock. Nothing more, nothing less. It's an honest living, even if it's not always easy. And yet, after all these years, I can't shake the feeling that there's something about this place I will never understand. Something waiting in the corners where the light doesn't reach. Maybe it's better that way. Maybe it's better not to know. If you ever find yourself in this place, you do well to listen closely. There are rules here and stories to go with them, and breaking either is a mistake you won't live to make twice. Now the first rule is simple. Don't swim where the deadlights are. Sometimes, on the calmest nights, faint, glowing orbs appear deep below the surface. The fishermen call them deadlights. They're not fish or jellyfish. They're something else. Some say they're drowned souls, trapped in the dark, luring the living to join them. There's no warning before they show up. One moment, the water looks normal. Next, those lights glow far below. Yellow, green, white. Doesn't matter. When you see them, you get out. Doesn't matter if you're mid-dive or waiting. Once the deadlights appear, you leave. If you don't, you won't be leaving at all. People tell stories about the deadlights, warnings passed down like heirlooms. There's the fisherman's wife who swore her husband was dragged under on a night when the water was smooth as glass. His boat was found adrift, nets full, but no sign of him, just faint glowing lights where his boat had been, or the man who disappeared while swimming too far from shore, the others said. Lights flickered beneath him just before he sank like a stone days later. His body washed up, lifeless and cold, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Some say the deadlights are spirits of those who died at sea, angry and jealous of the living. Others believe it's the ocean herself, playing tricks to claim more lives. I don't know which is true, but I've seen the deadlights myself, and I know better than to test them. The guy who did these tours before me told me a story once that happened one summer, years before I got started. He had a tourist on his boat, a guy in his 20s, all confidence and no sense. The tourist wanted to swim in the ocean for the thrill of it. The old-timer warned him not to, told him it wasn't safe to swim at night, but the tourist just laughed, said the old man was being dramatic, and jumped in anyway. The old-timer sat there, jaw clenched, watching the water. He didn't trust it. Not at night, not in these parts. And that's when he saw them. The deadlights, faint glowing orbs flickering just beneath the surface, right under the tourist. He yelled for the guy to get out, told him to grab the ladder, but the tourist just laughed again. Then the laughing stopped. The old-timer said the tourist froze in the water, his face changing in an instant. His eyes went wide, like he was seeing something no one else could. He looked down, and then he was gone. No splashing, no sound, just gone. The water stilled, and the dead lights flickered out like they'd never been there. The body washed ashore days later. I've learned from his lesson and never taken anyone out after dark since. It's not worth the risk. The sea is as cruel as she is beautiful, and the deadlights are proof of that. The second rule: always put wax in your ears when passing by Salt Rock. That place is a stretch of rocks coming out of the water like broken bones. The rocks are sharp enough to shred a boat's hull in seconds, and shipwrecks litter the area like broken toys. It's a place you avoid unless you absolutely have to go near it. The danger isn't just the rocks, it's what you can't see. Salt Rock is home to sirens, and no, they're not the beautiful kind from fairy tales. You can't see them, but you can hear them. It starts as a low hum, something you feel in your bones before you hear it. The sound grows louder as you get closer. It doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in soft at first, like a lullaby in the wind. But if you let it sink in, if you listen too long, you're done for. The siren song pulls you toward the rocks, draws you in like a moth to flame. You'll think it's the most beautiful song you've ever heard, and by the time you realize what's happening, your boat will be splintered and you'll be drowning. That's why we use wax. Every fisherman carries soft, sticky stuff to block out the sound. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. I keep a pocket full on me at all times and a tin of it on my boat if you see me heading out. You'll notice me stop at the dock to press it into my ears before I go anywhere near that place. I had a tourist once, an older guy in his 50s. He'd read about the sirens online and didn't believe in old fishermen's tales. He wanted to see the shipwrecks. He waved cash in my face, but I told him straight up I don't go there and neither should you. He found another boat, someone desperate enough to take the money. I don't know what happened out there. When they brought his boat back, he wasn't on it. The man who took him didn't say a word. He just tied the boat up, got in his truck, and left town. Salt Rock has been that way as long as anyone can remember. The rocks stay sharp, the shipwrecks stay piled, and the sirens stay hungry. No one's ever tried to clear the wrecks or chart a safe path through. It's now worth it. You leave it alone, like everyone else around here. This place is full of dangers, but they're not hidden. They're out in the open. You just have to know how to recognize them. The rules aren't complicated, but they're unforgiving. Break them, and the sea will remind you who's really in charge. The next rule is for the fishermen. Always check your ropes. You think rope is just a rope. A simple thing. Nothing special about it. But out here, ropes are lifelines. They hold your nets, secure your boat, and make sure the catch doesn't drift away. Without them, you're not just losing your haul, you're putting yourself at risk. So we check the knots, the lines, the fibers, and we don't take chances. But sometimes, no matter how careful you are, the ropes don't last. Fishermen talk about finding their ropes frayed or gnawed clean through, the ends marked with tiny, jagged teeth. The old-timers call the culprits rope biters. Nobody's ever seen one, but the signs are always the same. Nets floating loose, traps drifting off, and a clean bite through the thickest rope. Rope biters are why we double-check every knot before setting out, and why we don't use cheap lines. Some fishermen even have rituals. My uncle used to spit on the knots before tossing them overboard, swearing it kept the rope biters away. Others sprinkle salt over their nets to bless the lines. Me, I just check the ropes twice, sometimes 3 times, and then I head out and it's worked so far. Then there's the hair tradition. A lot of fishermen around here grow their hair long, not for style, but for the sea. Old fishermen believe giving a piece of yourself to the sea keeps her from taking the whole of you. They tie strands of hair into knots and throw them overboard as offerings. It distracts the creatures below, they say, giving them something to take so they don't follow your boat. My dad taught me to knot the strands just right so they wouldn't come undone before sinking. It felt silly at first, like playing in an old superstition. But one day, when I forgot, my boat wouldn't stop drifting. No matter how tight I tied the anchor, it kept pulling loose. After that, I never forgot again. Call it coincidence if you want, but I'm not taking chances. Some younger guys laugh it off, calling it an old wives' tale, but they'll learn out here. Ignoring the old ways doesn't end well. And then there's the salt line. This one's different. Doesn't happen often. Maybe a handful of times in a fisherman's life. But when it does, it stays burned in your memory forever. On foggy days, a faint white line sometimes appears on the water. It stretches out past the horizon, like someone took chalk and drew it on the ocean. The old-timers call it the salt line. They say it's a border, a line between our world and something else. Crossing it takes you to waters you can't return from. The waters past the salt line aren't part of our world anymore. There's something else. And once you're there, you're gone for good. I remember hearing about a boat that went missing when I was a kid. Small fishing crew. 3 guys vanished after a fog rolled in. Days later, their boat was spotted drifting near the salt line. Some fishermen swore they saw the crew waving for help, but nobody went near it. They knew better. The boats past the salt line aren't alive anymore. The wood looks too old, too rotten, but the boats still float and the people, if you can call them that, don't look right either. They're pale, like they've been underwater too long, and their movements are jerky and wrong. If you ever see a boat past the salt line, turn around. Don't wave back. Don't call out. Don't go near it. And if someone waves to you from one of those boats, ignore them. They're dead. Even if they don't know it yet. I've only seen the salt line once. Early one morning, with fog so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead, I spotted it. A thin white line cutting across the water. Didn't look like much, just a faint shimmer, but the sight of it made my stomach drop. I reeled my mitts in faster than I ever had, and I turned the boat around. It didn't matter that the catch was finished. I was not sticking around to find out what was on the other side. On my way back, I thought I saw something in the fog. The shadow of a boat, maybe drifting near the salt line. I didn't slow down to check. Didn't look too hard, just kept going. When I told the other fishermen what I'd seen, they nodded like it was nothing new. One clapped me on the back and told me I did the right thing. I've never gone out in the fog since. If it rolls in while I'm on the water, I head straight back. The sea can keep her secrets. I don't need to know about them. The last rule is the simplest, but maybe the most important. Never go near the lighthouse. It sits on a barren island, a lonely black shape against the horizon. Nothing grows there. No trees, no grass. Not even the stubborn plants that cling to rocks everywhere else. The island is dead. Even birds avoid it, going miles out of their way. Fishermen do the same. You'd have to be desperate or stupid to get close. The lighthouse has been abandoned for as long as I've been alive. Nobody talks about why. Some say the keeper vanished one night without a trace. Others claim the lighthouse was never meant to guide ships at all. Whatever the truth, everyone agrees it's cursed. You don't go there, you don't look too long, and you don't trust the light if it comes on. The light shouldn't come on. There's nobody there to turn it on. The dock has rotted away, and the only boat big enough to make the trip sank years ago. But sometimes, late at night, the light shines anyway. It cuts through the fog, sharp and searching, like it's looking for someone. If you have binoculars, you can spot strange items scattered across the island. A red backpack, a yellow notepad, a pair of sneakers, a hair comb. Little things that don't belong. People say they're the belongings of those who drowned or disappeared near the lighthouse. Tourists, mostly. People who didn't know better or thought they could handle it. The first time I saw the light, I was 15. It was late, well past dark, and I was sitting on the dock with friends, watching the waves. The rain had let up, and the quiet was heavy. The way it gets around here sometimes. Then the light came on. At first it was faint, barely noticeable through the fog. Then it grew brighter, sweeping back and forth across the water. Daniel joked that the lighthouse was coming back to life. He laughed, but there was this nervousness in his voice. None of us said anything. We just stared. Finally, Jimmy, an older kid who already worked on the fishing boats, stood up. He didn't hesitate. He told us to look away, grab my arm, and pull me to my feet. Jimmy had the kind of authority that came from knowing things we didn't. None of us questioned him. We followed him back to town without a word when we got there. He told us plainly we were never to talk about what we'd seen. The light, he warned, wasn't something to trust. It wasn't guiding anyone. It was tricking them. I didn't understand what he meant back then, but I do now. The lighthouse doesn't guide you to safety. It lures you in, and if you follow it, you don't come back. There are plenty of stories about those who didn't listen, like the couple who thought the lighthouse was romantic. They rented a small boat and rowed out, ignoring every warning. When the fog rolled in, they vanished. Days later, their boat was found drifting near the lighthouse. It was empty. Then there was the local who decided to camp on the island. He said the stories were old superstitions. He rode out with a tent and supplies, determined to prove there was nothing to fear. By morning, his boat had washed up on shore. He hadn't. All anyone found was his flashlight lying in the sand with dead batteries. I've seen the light a few times since that night on the dock. I don't look directly at it anymore. I turn away. They focus on something else and wait for it to go out. It always does. Nobody knows why it happens. Some say the lighthouse has a will of its own, turning on when it senses someone nearby. Others think it's a signal, a way of calling something back to the island. Whatever the reason, the rule stays the same. You don't go near it. Let the lighthouse stand alone and forgotten. The sea has enough dangers without adding that to the list. And if you ever see the light shining out through the fog, just remember, no one is manning that lighthouse. Whatever's turning that light on, it isn't human. There's one last story I need to tell about how I lost my right hand. I don't share it often, but if you're going to understand the rules, they're real weight. You need to know it happened on a gray summer day years ago. Tourist season, if you can call it that. This town doesn't get floods of visitors, but now and then strangers pass through. They're easy to spot. Clean clothes, wide eyes, like they're looking at a painting instead of a real place. That summer, there were more than usual. It happens sometimes when the stories about this place get passed around too much. Rumors spark curiosity, and suddenly people want to see it for themselves. At first it was fine. It always is. We sold more fish. The souvenir shop had its best month in years, and even the bar was louder, full of strangers swapping exaggerated tales about this place. Noise means business in a town like this, so nobody complained. But peace never lasts here. Not for long. One family stood out among the tourists. Mom, dad, and a teenage son looked normal enough. Middle class, shiny sneakers, a decent car. The kind of people who'd pick a cheap fishing town over a fancy resort for authentic experiences. They rented a small room at the inn and stayed a week. The parents kept to themselves, walking the beach and snapping photos. But the boy was something else. He was a college kid studying marine biology, and he could tell he loved it. I overheard him telling an old-timer how he wanted to work with sharks or coral reef someday. Big dreams for a place like this. But what really lit him up were the sea monster stories. He devoured every tale about dead lights, sirens, and shipwrecks. Like a kid unwrapping Christmas presents, his questions came fast and endless. What did the fishermen think the deadlights were? Were sirens real? Has anyone seen the boats pass the salt line? Looking back, the signs were obvious. The curiosity, the questions, the way his eyes lit up when someone humored him. But in the moment, it just felt nice. Flattering, even. When you've spent your life in a forgotten town, it's easy to let your guard down when someone shows interest. The boy spent his days sketching boats or jotting notes in a little leather journal. He wasn't in anyone's way, so nobody told him to leave. When he wasn't sketching, he was talking, chatting up sailors and fishermen like they were old friends. He especially fixated on the lighthouse, though he didn't say it outright. But I noticed how his questions always circled back to it. What's the farthest anyone sailed? Has anyone gone to the lighthouse? Does that light mean anything? Most of the fishermen brushed him off, but a few humored him, giving the usual warnings. Don't go near it. Don't trust the light. The island's cursed. They said it like you'd warn a kid about touching a hot stove. He laughed, called it folklore, but his curiosity only grew. By the end of the week, the family had become a familiar sight. The parents had their routines while the boy lingered by the docks, asking questions and sketching. Some of the fishermen liked him, saying he reminded them of their kids back when they were full of questions instead of complaints. I can't blame them for not seeing it. Curiosity can look harmless. But in this town, curiosity is dangerous. Too much of it. And you stop seeing the rules as rules. You start thinking of them as challenges. I've seen it happen. Tourists think the stories are just stories. Locals getting too confident. Never ends well. The day before everything changed started like any other gray skies, a light drizzle. Weather so typical we barely notice it anymore. I was prepping for a tour with a few tourists, the kind of slow morning where the water feels heavier, like it's holding secrets. I didn't think much of it. When I got back to the dock, the family was there. The parents waved politely, but the boy wasn't with them. I figured he was sketching or pestering some old-timer. It wasn't until evening, when the fog began creeping in, I realized I hadn't seen him all day. It wasn't unusual for tourists to wander off, but something gnawed at me. I shook it off, telling myself he was fine, probably back at the inn. But deep down I knew better. The signs were there, and I'd ignored them. I just didn't know yet what it would cost me. By the time evening came, I knew something was wrong. The boy's parents stormed into the bar, their faces pale and tense. The mom was holding a piece of paper in her hands, shaking so badly she could barely keep it still. The dad's jaw was tight, his expression stuck between fear and anger. They asked if anyone had seen their son, and I felt them sinking away to my chest. The boy hadn't been seen all day. Not by me, not by the other fishermen, not by anyone. That alone was bad enough. But then the mom unfolded the note she was holding and read it out loud, her voice trembling. It said that afternoon he'd gone out to Salt Rock. Salt Rock. Of all the places he could have gone, why there? Didn't make sense at first, until I thought about all those questions he'd been asking, all those stories he couldn't get enough of. He wasn't just curious about the sea, he was curious about its secrets, the things no one else dared touch. And now it seemed he'd gone looking for them. The mom was near tears, and I could see the panic in her eyes. The dad looked calmer on the outside, but I could see it too. The helplessness hiding behind his stern expression. They were scared, and they had every reason to be. I don't have kids of my own, but I've always had a soft spot for me. They remind me of when life was simpler before I knew what the sea was capable of. So when I heard where the boy had gone, I didn't stop to think twice. I told the parents to stay inside the bar where it was warm and dry, where they'd be safe. The last thing I needed was for them to go out there themselves and get into even more trouble. The other fishermen started whispering to each other as soon as the parents sat down. I could hear their voices carrying over the bar. They weren't planning to go after the boy, not to Salt Rock. I caught bits of what they were saying. How the sea has been too rough lately. How going out there would be a waste of time. "But a kid's out there," I said. Nobody answered. They just stared at me, shame on their faces. But none of them moved. Not one. A few of them looked down at their drinks, their eyes avoiding mine. Others looked at the parents who sat quietly in the corner. The mom still holding that piece of paper. No one offered to come with me. Their silence said everything. I didn't have time to argue. I turned and left. If no one else was going to help, I'd do it myself. The first thing I did was take out my knife and cut a long braid from my hair. I tied it into knots the way my father had taught me, my hands working fast and steady. A piece of myself for the sea. A small offering, a distraction. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Next, I packed extra wax into my bag. Salt Rock was no place to be unprepared. The sirens there didn't care who you were or why you'd come. They'd drown you all the same if you weren't careful. The wax was my best defense, and I wasn't about to leave without it. Finally, I went over my ropes, checking every knot and line twice, then a third time to be sure. The sea was restless, and I couldn't afford even the smallest mistake. Rope biters or not, my lines had to hold. If they didn't, I'd be as lost as the boy. When everything was ready, I pushed my boat off the dock and climbed aboard. I started the engine and headed straight for Salt Rock. The wind was cold against my face, and the spray of the water stung my skin. But I didn't stop. The jagged rocks loomed ahead, their sharp edges rising out of the sea. I gripped the wheel tighter and steered toward the dark horizon. It didn't take long to reach Salt Rock, but every minute felt like an eternity. The waves were rough, the wind howling like it wanted to tear me from the wheel. With wax pressed firmly in my ears, I scanned the waters near the rocks. The rocks jutted out like spears, dark and sharp, and the wrecked boats clinging to them looked like skeletons. I called his name over and over, my voice raw against the roaring sea. The crashing waves were deafening, even with the wax dulling the sound. I yelled as loud as I could, hoping he'd hear me and call back. And then out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement, something in the water, a tail, maybe a wing. It was there for a heartbeat, then gone. And then I remembered my father's words. He told me long ago that if you wanted something back from the sea, something it had already taken, you had to offer it something in return. The sea doesn't give for free, he told me once. I'd always thought it was just one of his stories, but now those words felt like my only hope. I stopped shouting and stood at the edge of the boat, staring into the dark waves. I know you have him. Give him back. He's just a kid. The sea didn't answer. The waves kept crashing. The wind kept screaming. My father said the sea might listen, but only if you gave it something in return. I took a breath, steadying myself against the rocking of the boat, and spoke again. What do you want? What will it take to give him back? The waves didn't stop, but something changed. It wasn't anything I could see or hear, just a shift in the air, like the sea was considering my words. Then, with a soft thud, something bumped against the side of the boat. I leaned down and saw a piece of driftwood. Worn, smooth, and pale from years in the water, it bobbed there, gently tapping the hull as if waiting for me. Cautiously, I pulled it up and turned it over in my hand. That's when I saw it scratched into the surface in jagged letters that looked carved by something sharp as a single word hand. I stared at it for a moment, the weight of what it meant settling over me like a lead anchor. Sirens are greedy creatures. They don't bargain lightly, and once they've asked for something, they don't accept substitutes. I knew there was no point trying to offer anything else. It was my hand or nothing. I looked out at the dark water, imagining the boy's pale face beneath it, his lungs filling with seawater, his life slipping further away with each second. I didn't have time to think about it. There was no time to argue, no time to hesitate. I looked down at my right hand, resting on the edge of the boat, my forefinger curled slightly from gripping the wheel. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I reached for the knife strapped to my belt. The blade was sharp. I kept it that way for cutting ropes, and it gleamed faintly in the gray light. I clenched my teeth and placed the blade just above my wrist, steadying myself with a deep breath. The pain was instant and blinding, but I didn't stop. I cut through, and I watched as my hand fell into the water. The sea swallowed it immediately, the waves pulling it down as if it had never existed. My left hand worked on instinct, grabbing a rope and tying it tight around the stump to stop the bleeding. The knot was strong, and then everything went still. The waves, the wind, even the air itself seemed to pause, holding its breath. Then I heard it, a faint, dull thud against the side of my boat. And there he was, the boy. His face was pale, his hair stuck to his head, but he was alive. He was pounding his fist against the hull, his other hand clawing at the edge, trying to hold on. I grabbed him with my left arm and hauled him out of the deck with every ounce of strength I had left. He collapsed, coughing for air, sea water pouring from his mouth. I felt my knees beside him, relief washing over me, even as the pain in my arm throbbed. He was alive, thank God. Somehow, against all odds, he was alive. I forced myself to my feet and stumbled back to the wheel. Steering the boat with one hand wasn't easy, but I managed to do it. I aimed us towards the shore and pushed the engine as hard as it would go. The waves fought me every step of the way, but I held on. The boy's breathing was shallow, and I knew he wasn't safe yet. His lungs were full of water, and his body was weak. I had to get him back quickly. When we reached the dock, the other fishermen were waiting. They pulled the boy out and carried him to his parents, who were sobbing with relief. His mom held him tightly, tears soaking his shirt, while his dad stood with one hand on his shoulder. The boy and I were rushed to the hospital miles away. He survived. Barely. The doctor said if I'd been a minute later, he wouldn't have made it. As for me, they did what they could with what was left of my arm. The knot I tied had stopped the bleeding, but I knew I'd never be the same. The boy's parents thanked me over and over, their words pouring out in a flood of gratitude. I didn't say much in return. There wasn't much to say. I'd done what I had to do, and I had paid the price. That's how it works with a seat. You don't get something for nothing. Well, some time has passed since then. The kids call me Captain Hook now. I don't mind, it's kind of cute in a childish way. I let them call me that. Sometimes I even play along. I do look a bit like a pirate, I'll admit. My long hair is braided on one side, though it's mostly gray now. I smoke a pipe when I'm out on the docks, the smell of tobacco mixing with the salty air. My jacket is old and patched in places, and my face looks the same worn and rough, like driftwood washed up by the tide. And of course, there's the hook. It's nothing fancy. Just a simple metal curve where my hand used to be, but it's well shined and it gets the job done. I learned quickly how to work with it. I can tie knots, haul nets, steer the boat, even carve with like before. Life doesn't stop because you lose a part of yourself. You adapt. You keep going. Things have gone back to normal since that day. The boy lived, though I never saw him or his family again after I left the hospital. He sent me a postcard once when he graduated college. Good kid. The sea hasn't changed much. Neither has the town. The rain still falls, the clouds still hang low, and the air still smells like salt. The mold creeps up the walls like it's trying to take the town back. Piece by piece, the fishermen still head out every day, and tourists still wander in, drawn by the same old stories. The deadlines, the salt line, Salt Rock, and the lighthouse. They're all still here, waiting for someone to forget the rules. I still warn every tourist who comes through town. Some listen, some don't. It's not my job to make them believe, just to tell them what they need to know. I share my stories wherever I can, on the boat, around a fire, or over drinks at the bar. Stories keep people alive here. They teach the rules in a way that sticks, even if folks don't realize it at the time. They make you think twice before stepping into danger, before taking a risk you don't understand. Life goes on. It always does. Quiet and unyielding. The sea doesn't care about the things we've lost or the scars we carry. It just keeps moving, wave after wave, tide after tide. All we can do is move with it. So if you ever find yourself in a little coastal town called a swamp, though it's not really a swamp, you do well to follow the rules. They're simple, but they're unforgiving. Don't swim where the deadlines are. Don't cross the salt line. Always carry wax and don't go to the lighthouse. Most of all, never go near Salt Rock. The sea has its ways, and it doesn't care if you understand them, but if you respect them, if you follow the rules, you might just live long enough to tell the tale.